Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Beneath the Forgotten Factory, Descent into Hidden Horror. I had always been drawn to places that other people forgot, old buildings left to rot, neighborhoods marked by nothing but faded signs and broken windows. The factory sat on the outskirts, half swallowed by an overgrown yard filled with weeds and rusting machinery. The building itself was a hulking mass of brick and broken glass. Windows were cracked or entirely missing, and the main entrance was chained shut, but there were plenty of other ways in if you looked hard enough. I found a side door, its hinges frozen with rust but still creaking open with some effort. The air inside was thick and stale, carrying the smell of mildew and dust that had settled in for years. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside, the beam cutting through the darkness. The floor was littered with debris, scraps of metal, shattered glass, and bits of fabric that might have been part of the factory's last batch of textiles. The walls, once painted white, were now faded and stained, covered in graffiti and peeling paint. I kept my phone in my pocket, but the reception was spotty here. I couldn't rely on it if I needed help. I moved slowly, trying to take everything in. The place was a maze of long corridors and large rooms filled with rusting machines, conveyor belts frozen in place, and workstations left as if the workers had vanished mid-shift. It was eerie, but not unusual for a place abandoned so suddenly. I imagined the lives that had passed through these halls decades ago, the noise, the sweat, the chatter, and now it was all silent except for the occasional drip of water echoing somewhere deep inside. As I made my way deeper into the factory, my flashlight flickered for a second, and I thought I heard something, a faint scuffle, maybe a whisper of movement. I stopped and held my breath, listening. Nothing. Probably a rat or a bird that had found its way in. I told myself to stay focused. I reached what looked like the main production floor, a cavernous room with high ceilings and broken skylights. It was mostly empty, but scattered around were signs of more recent activity, a few discarded soda cans, a crumpled fast food wrapper, and footprints in the dust that didn't look old. That made my skin crawl. The factory wasn't as abandoned as I thought. That's when I noticed the door, partly hidden behind some old crates and covered with a thick layer of grime. It was a heavy steel door, unlike the battered wooden ones I'd seen elsewhere. I brushed off the dirt and saw a small, grimy window near the top, cracked but not broken. Something about it felt different, more deliberate, less forgotten. Curiosity pushed me forward, and I tried the handle. It turned with a reluctant groan, and the door swung open slowly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I hesitated. I didn't know what I'd find down there, but I couldn't resist. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way down. The air grew colder and damper with every step. The walls were concrete, slick with moisture, and the sound of dripping water echoed in the silence. At the bottom, I found myself in a small basement room, roughly 8 by 10 feet, with bare walls and a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The light was weak but enough to illuminate the space. That's when I saw it, signs that this place wasn't just some forgotten cellar. There were fresh items scattered around, blankets folded neatly on the floor, empty food containers, and most disturbingly, a small collection of personal belongings, wallets, keys, a child's toy car, and a few pieces of jewelry. None of it looked old. Someone had been here recently, maybe even living here. My heart raced. I had heard about kidnappings in the area, cases that never got solved, people who vanished without a trace. Could this be connected? Was someone using this hidden room to keep their victims? I stepped further inside, my flashlight trembling in my hand. On the far wall, I spotted what looked like makeshift restraints attached to a metal bar. The idea of someone being held captive here filled me with a cold dread I couldn't shake. I had to get out, had to call someone, but I also needed to know if anyone was still here. Then I noticed the walls. They weren't solid concrete as I'd assumed. Near the corners, small cracks formed narrow slits, peeling paint around thin wooden panels. It looked like someone had created a hidden space within the basement itself, a place to observe whoever entered without being seen. I froze, every nerve screaming at me that I was no longer alone. My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow slipping behind one of the cracked walls. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breathing. Whoever was watching me wasn't just a rumor or a ghost story. They were real, right here, hidden behind the walls, waiting. The question was, how long had they been watching? And what would happen now that I knew? I had to get out. But as I turned back toward the stairs, I realized something worse than being trapped in this room was the fact that I had walked straight into someone else's trap and they hadn't revealed themselves for a reason. The beam of my flashlight flickered over the floor, tracing the outline of a cracked tile that looked oddly out of place amidst the dirt and rubble. My heartbeat quickened, and I forced myself to stand, scanning the room with more urgency. I ventured deeper into the factory, past the rusted machinery and collapsed walls, following a faint draft that whispered through the cracks like a secret. That's when I saw the door, a narrow metal slab, almost hidden behind a stack of broken pallets, its edges cleaner than the rest of the decayed surroundings. It looked almost too new. With a deep breath, I pushed against it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness beneath the factory floor. The air that greeted me was colder and heavier, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my stomach churn. If there was a basement, this could be where the factory's old maintenance tunnels or storage rooms were, but something about it felt off. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight app, although the beam was weak compared to the one on my flashlight. The stairs were slick with moisture, and every step echoed against the concrete walls. At the bottom, the narrow hallway stretched ahead, the walls lined with peeling paint and damp patches. I moved forward slowly, every sense alert. Then I noticed something that stopped me cold, a faint outline of a door frame, freshly painted black, the edges sharp and clean. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep this hidden. I reached out and turned the knob. It gave way with surprising ease. Inside was a small room dimly lit by a single, flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. The walls were bare except for one side, where a series of photographs taped haphazardly caught my eye. The images were disturbing, snapshots of people, mostly young adults and teenagers, but what really unsettled me was that they all looked scared, eyes wide, often pleading. Some were tied up, others gagged. The dates scribbled on the back of the photos were recent, some just days old. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. This wasn't just an abandoned factory anymore. This was a haunting ground. On a rickety table beneath the photos lay a collection of items strewn carelessly, a tangle of ropes, duct tape, a worn leather glove, and several pieces of clothing that smelled faintly of mildew, but also something else, something darker. I hesitated, then picked up a jacket. It was cold to the touch, and my fingers trembled as I ran them over the fabric. My mind raced. If these people had been taken here, where were they now? How long had this been going on? I glanced back at the photos again, noting the last one was dated just 2 days ago. A sudden noise, a soft creak from beyond the wall behind me, made me spin around. The room was small, the walls cracked and stained, but just behind the peeling plaster I could see a faint sliver of light piercing through a tiny hole. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard muffled breathing. Someone was close. Watching. Panic surged through me as I realized I wasn't alone. Someone had to be monitoring this place, keeping tabs on their prey and, apparently, on anyone foolish enough to intrude. I stepped back, heart pounding, and my mind scrambled for options. Retreat was tempting, but I couldn't leave without knowing more. I needed to find evidence to help whoever was caught down here. But the risk was becoming terrifyingly real. Moving carefully, I traced the edges of the room, searching for another exit or perhaps a way to gather more clues. My hand brushed against a loose brick in the wall, and with a gentle tug, it shifted, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a crudely folded notebook, its cover worn but the ink inside stark and fresh. I opened it, hand shaking, and began to read. The entries were sporadic and written in a hurried scrawl, detailing dates, times, and moves references to the targets, the weights, and the watch. The language was clinical and cold, devoid of empathy but full of meticulous obsession. One passage stood out: "No mistakes tonight. They watched the door." I had to wait until the sound faded. "I am close now. I will not lose control." The handwriting was jagged, desperate, but determined. I stuffed the notebook into my jacket pocket and turned to leave when I noticed a faint scraping noise from behind the door. Someone was trying to listen, or worse. Adrenaline took over. I slammed the door shut and locked it with a makeshift latch I found nearby, then bolted back up the stairs, my flashlight beam darting wildly over the walls. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, every sound amplified. As I reached the top, I paused, straining to hear anything from below, but only silence greeted me. I pushed the heavy metal door closed and wedged a piece of broken wood under the handle. I needed to get out of the factory, fast. Outside, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the yard. I checked my phone, still no reliable signal. I was isolated here, alone with whoever was watching from those cracked walls. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my nerves. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore. I had stumbled into something dangerous, something human and utterly relentless. If I wanted to survive and help those people, I needed a plan. And I needed to be sure I wasn't being followed. As I slipped back into the shadows, I kept my ears open, every sense screaming that the captor's eyes were still fixed on me, just beyond the cracked walls, waiting for their next move. The hidden room was colder than the rest of the factory, its air stale but heavy, like it had been sealed off for a long, long time. I dropped down onto an upturned crate and pulled one of the notes closer to the light. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, like it had been written by someone under serious stress. The note read, "Please help. I'm in the factory. They won't let me leave. I don't know how much longer I can hold on." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some urban legend or an abandoned building left to rust and ruin. Someone had been here, someone had been trapped here, and maybe, just maybe, was still here. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the rest of the room. A makeshift cot lay in one corner, a thin blanket draped over it. There was a small pile of canned food next to it, a few spoons and a cracked cup. Nothing about the scene suggested a permanent home, but it was clear this place had been lived in recently. Then I noticed it, a narrow gap between two plywood panels, about the width of a finger. At first, I thought it was just a construction flaw, but as I edged closer, I saw movement, a pair of eyes reflected back at me. Frozen, I stared, barely breathing. The eyes blinked once, then disappeared. I slammed my flashlight beam toward the gap, but it was too narrow. No way to see anything else. A knot twisted in my stomach. Whoever was watching me was close. Too close. My first instinct was to get out, fast. But as I turned back to the door, I realized it was no longer where I'd left it. The plywood panel I had pushed open to enter was now flush with the wall. I shook it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to rise. The room was a trap. I ran my hands along the walls, searching for any other exit. Nothing. just plywood panels and the solid concrete beyond. Phone in my pocket was useless, no signal, as always inside the factory. Then I heard it, the faint scraping of nails against wood, from the gap. My breath caught. The eyes appeared again, watching me, silent. The realization hit with crushing weight. The captor wasn't just watching, they were waiting, hiding in the walls, watching every move. I crouched low, trying to think fast. The note showed desperation, but here I was, trapped in a room with someone who clearly had control over the space. The captor must have known I'd come. This was no accident. A thud echoed from the other side of the wall. Then another. My mind raced. Was the captor shifting their position? Preparing something? I tried to steady my breathing, to stay calm, but my hands trembled. I scanned the room again, looking for anything I could use. The cot's frame was metal, rusted but still sturdy. The water bottle was plastic, useless as a weapon. The backpack was torn open. Inside was a small pocket knife, probably left by a previous victim. I grabbed it. The trapped feeling pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. My mind flashed to the stories I'd heard in town, families who'd lost kids years ago, never found. I thought those were just rumors, or the work of criminals long gone. But now, it was real, happening here, inside this factory. I pressed my ear against the wall. The sound stopped. Silence stretched out, long and heavy. Then, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. Don't scream. Please. The voice was trembling, low, desperate. Not a threat, but a plea. Someone else was in the walls. Or maybe a different room, connected by these gaps I'd just discovered. My fingers tightened around the knife's handle. I whispered back, I'm here. I'm going to get you out. No response. Just silence again. I tried to piece together what I was dealing with. This captor had built a maze inside the factory, rooms within walls, secret spaces. They were careful, organized, and cruel. The notes scattered around the room were proof others had been trapped here too, maybe for days, weeks. Suddenly, a sharp knock pounded on the plywood panel beside me. It wasn't erratic, but deliberate, like a code. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Pause. 1 knock. My mind raced to understand it. Was it a signal? A warning? Or a plea? I tapped back. 3, 2, 1. The door creaked. A panel slid open just enough to slip my arm through. I grabbed a piece of torn fabric from the floor and pushed it through. After a moment, the fabric was pulled back, then pushed through again, this time soaked with something cold and sticky. My stomach twisted. Blood. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just some urban exploration anymore. This was a hell I hadn't been prepared for. From the gap, a voice whispered again, more urgent this time, they'll come back soon. Hide. Don't trust the man in the shadows. My heart leapt. Who was this man in the shadows? The captor? Another victim? I didn't know, but I knew I had to get out or find this person and get them out. I pressed my ear to the panel, listening. Footsteps echoed outside the room. Heavy, slow. Not my pace. The captor was coming back. I glanced around, desperate for escape. The hidden room was a prison. The captor's eyes had found me once, they'd find me again. Then I noticed something else. The floor beneath the cot was slightly raised, a thin metal seam running along the edge. I pried at it with the knife. The panel lifted just enough to reveal a narrow crawl space beneath, dark and smelling faintly of damp earth. No other choice. I slid into the crawl space, the metal edges scraping my arms, the darkness swallowing me whole. From the gap in the wall, I heard the captor's voice, low and chilling, "I see you." My breath caught, but I forced myself to move forward, inch by inch, with only my flashlight to cut through the black. The crawl space led to another narrow chamber, filled with more signs of captivity, straps bolted into the walls, fresh footprints in the dust, and a mattress stained dark. A person lay curled on it, eyes wide and wild with fear. "Hey," I whispered, "I'm here to help." They scrambled up, trembling, clutching a ragged shirt to their face. "You have to get out. Now." I nodded, heart hammering as the weight of what I'd uncovered settled on me. This factory wasn't abandoned, it was a trap, a prison run by someone who was still here, still watching, and still dangerous. And I was right in the middle of it. The moment I pushed open the heavy metal door, a rush of stale, cold air hit me, carrying a sharp metallic tang that didn't belong to decades of decay. There was stuff here. Not old, rusted tools or broken machinery, but things that looked untouched by time. Fresh footprints marked the dusty floor, their edges crisp, unweathered. Against the far wall hung several backpacks, their straps tangled and worn, but unmistakably recent. Clothing, jackets, shirts, even a child's small hoodie was tossed on a grimy cot, the fabric stiff but clean enough to know it hadn't been here long. My stomach sank, a cold knot forming deep inside. On a rickety table sat an open notebook, its pages scribbled with names, dates, addresses, all recent. The handwriting was frantic, jagged, as though whoever wrote it was constantly on edge. Some entries were crossed out, others underlined. The last page was only half filled, abruptly ending mid-sentence. As I scanned the room, the reality of what I'd found hit me like a punch. This wasn't just an abandoned factory harboring old secrets. Somebody was using it right now, using it to hide people. To keep them captive. I swallowed hard, heart thundering in my chest. I wanted to call the police, to run, to scream. But something else held me still, a prickling at the back of my neck, an unease I couldn't shake. Then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A scrape, soft and deliberate, coming from somewhere beyond the cracked wall to my right. My breath caught. The wall was old and brittle, the paint peeling away to reveal layers of rotting plaster underneath. At the cracked seams, tiny holes formed like the eyes of the building itself, watching. I pressed closer, and through the jagged openings, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow shifting just out of sight, too quick and sudden to be my own. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't alone here. Whoever was watching was still around. Still dangerous. I scanned the room for any makeshift weapons, nothing but broken chairs and a rusty pipe lying in the corner. I grabbed the pipe, feeling its cold weight steady my trembling hands. I needed to think, to plan, but my mind raced faster than my heart could keep up. I crouched by the cracked wall, whispering into the narrow gaps. "I know you're there." My voice was barely audible. "I'm not here to hurt anyone, but I'm not leaving without answers." Silence answered me. Then the scrape again, this time coming from behind a stack of crates near the far end of the room. I turned slowly, pipe raised. The crates were old but recently disturbed, the dust around them kicked up in small clouds. I edged forward, each step careful, the floor creaking beneath me. Behind the crates, I found a small trapdoor, its latch freshly oiled. The door was just big enough for a person to crawl through, the darkness beyond swallowing the light of my flashlight. I crouched, peering inside. It was a tunnel, narrow, damp, and descending into the unknown. The smell hit me instantly, something foul and sharp, a mix of mold and something metallic. My throat tightened as I considered my options. Going down that tunnel alone was risky, but leaving without telling anyone was worse. Just as I turned to leave, I caught another detail, a small camera lens peeking from a hole near the ceiling, blinking red, watching me. Somehow, I'd stumbled into a surveillance setup. Whoever ran this place was not just hiding, they were monitoring everything, maybe even feeding it to someone else. A cold realization sank in. I was being watched, tracked, and possibly herded like a rat in a maze. I backed away slowly, then froze. The scrape was louder now, closer. Footsteps, deliberate and slow, approaching the door I had just entered through. I slammed the trapdoor shut and locked it, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I scrambled toward the exit, but the way back was blocked. A figure loomed in the doorway, tall, shadowed beneath a hood. His eyes shone cold with menace. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low and calm, but dripping with threat. I gripped the pipe tighter, every instinct screaming to run, but I was trapped. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't understand the world you're stepping into. These people, they belong to me now." In that moment, I realized this wasn't some random abduction. It was calculated, organized, and terrifyingly close to me. The room seemed to close in, the shadows reaching out like hands ready to drag me down. I had to find a way out. I had to survive. Because nobody would hear me scream in here. My mind raced, searching for any weakness in his armor, any crack in the facade that I could exploit. The faint hum of the ventilation system was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. I edged toward the door, careful to keep my movements slow and deliberate. If I could just distract him for a moment, maybe I could slip past. But as my fingers brushed the cold metal handle, a whisper echoed from the darkness, "You're already too deep." Panic surged anew, but I forced myself to stay calm. There had to be a way. I didn't want to believe what I'd seen. After the adrenaline faded, I leaned against the cold brick, heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the silence. The stale air tasted sour in my mouth. I had to figure out what to do next fast. Leaving meant risking a confrontation with whoever was watching. Staying meant I might uncover more if I was careful. I wiped sweat from my brow and crouched, shining my flashlight over the makeshift bed. It wasn't just a bed, it was a small, organized space carved out of the factory's chaos. A tattered blanket lay folded beside a cracked plastic water bottle. Next to it, a battered backpack lay open, revealing a jumble of fresh clothes, a few energy bars, and several notebooks filled with hurried handwriting. My stomach twisted. The handwriting wasn't neat, it was desperate, sometimes shaky, like someone trying to hold on to their sanity. I flipped through a few pages. There were names, dates and times, mentions of places, coded phrases I couldn't decipher at first, but the message was clear. Someone had been held here, someone recently, maybe even now. That's when I heard it, a faint scraping noise from the wall opposite me. My flashlight beam caught a thin crack running along the bricks, just wide enough to see through. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Then a shadow shifted behind the crack. Someone was watching. I froze, every muscle tensing. The instinct to bolt was immediate, but I forced myself to stay still. Whoever was watching was close, but hidden. The crack was narrow. I couldn't see a face, just a sliver of movement, an eye, maybe a fingertip tracing the edge of the opening. The realization hit me like a punch. The captor wasn't just watching, they were waiting, ready to act. I took a slow breath, trying to control the rising panic. I needed information, and I had to get it without revealing I knew they were there. Carefully, I lowered myself to the floor, keeping my flashlight beam steady on the notebooks. If they wanted to watch, I would give them something to think about. I whispered into the silence, "I know you're there. I'm not here to fight. But I'm not leaving until I understand what's going on." The scraping stopped. The crack went still. Minutes passed. I stayed silent, heart hammering, flashlight steady. Then the sound came again, soft footsteps. Not running, but deliberate, cautious. Movement on the other side of the wall. I knew I had to plan my next move carefully. I couldn't just walk out. The main door was locked tight, but the side entrances were less secure. Still, if they were watching, they could have set traps or worse. I flipped through the notebooks again, this time more carefully. There were sketches, maps of the factory, markings indicating hidden passages and blind spots. One note caught my attention: watch the furnace room. Cameras installed. My blood ran cold. Cameras. Surveillance. The captor wasn't just hiding, they were monitoring every inch. Suddenly, a loose brick near the crack shifted. A pale hand emerged, holding a small, folded piece of paper pushed through the gap. I grabbed it with trembling fingers. It read, "You shouldn't be here. Leave before it's too late." I swallowed hard, folding the note away. That was no idle threat. Someone had gone through a lot of effort to keep this place secret, and now I was a problem. The footsteps retreated, and the shadow disappeared. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I realized I couldn't stay here much longer. But I had to get out with the notebooks, they were proof of everything. As I packed them carefully into my backpack, I made a decision. I would document everything, get out to the police, and expose this nightmare. Still, I needed a way out that didn't alert whoever was watching. I remembered the map in one of the notebooks, marked with a faint arrow toward the loading dock area, a place I hadn't yet explored. Maybe there was a way through there, a back exit or a forgotten service tunnel. I edged toward the door, keeping low, flashlight off. The floor creaked underfoot, but I paused, listening. No footsteps. No scraping sounds. Steeling myself, I slipped through the doorway back into the factory's main area. The moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting ghostly beams onto the rusted machinery. Every shadow seemed alive, every noise amplified in the silence. I moved quickly but cautiously, retracing my steps to the loading dock. The notebook's map was accurate. A side door, barely visible behind a stack of old crates, stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open just enough to slip through, heart pounding as fresh night air hit my face. The yard outside was overgrown and dark, but free. I didn't stop running until I reached the streetlights of the nearby neighborhood. Only then did I dare to look back, half expecting to see someone watching. But the factory stood silent, dark, and empty, at least for now. I knew this wasn't over. Whoever had set this up was still out there, still watching. And now, they knew I was watching back. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a warning message flashing across the screen. Time was running out, and I had to move fast. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and scanned the street ahead. The quiet hum of the streetlights did little to calm the knot tightening in my stomach. Every shadow seemed to twist into something sinister, every distant sound a signal that I wasn't alone. I needed a plan fast. But more than that, I needed allies. This wasn't just some random setup, it was calculated, methodical. Whoever was behind it had resources, reach. And I was just a single step in their game. Pulling my jacket tighter around me, I started walking toward the nearest cafe, hoping to find a familiar face, someone I could trust. Because if I was going to fight back, I wasn't going to do it alone. Story 2, Vanishing Point, Kidnapped to Erase Existence. I woke up to cold concrete pressing against my cheek, the roughness scraping the skin raw. I tried to move my arms. They were restrained, cold steel biting into my wrists. The chain rattled faintly when I shifted, the click of the handcuffs disappointing me with their certainty. Panic flared, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think. Where was I? How had I gotten here? My last clear memory was of leaving the coffee shop after a late meeting, checking my phone for a message from Sarah. The screen had been blank. Then nothing. No car, no familiar street lights, no sounds of the city. Just this dark room. I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat intensifying. My mind raced through possibilities: robbery, mistaken identity. But if someone wanted money, why not ask for it? Why wake me up here, bound like a prisoner? Scrambling to take stock, I shifted my head enough to see a dim glow coming from a bare bulb hanging overhead, encased in a rusty cage. The light flickered occasionally, casting long, twitching shadows that made the room feel bigger and more ominous. I counted the walls in my head: 4, concrete, unadorned except for some graffiti scrawled in faded black marker. A single metal door stood across from me, its surface dented and scratched, the kind of door meant to keep people in or out. I tested the handcuffs again, willing the lock to fail. No luck. The cold bit deeper into my skin. My legs were free, but I didn't dare move too much, not knowing if anyone was watching. A noise from the door made me freeze, a soft creak, a shifting shadow. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with a reluctant groan. A man stepped inside. I couldn't see his face clearly at first. The light behind him was harsh, turning him into a silhouette. "Don't scream," he said calmly. His voice was low, measured, without a hint of emotion. "You won't get far, and it won't help." I swallowed, forcing myself to respond. "Who are you? What do you want?" He stepped forward, hands shoved into the pockets of a dark jacket. "I'm not here for money." That made no sense. "Then why did you bring me here? What is this place?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved closer, the harsh light revealing more of his features: late 30s, sharp eyes, a thin scar trailing from the corner of his right eyebrow down toward his cheek. His gaze was steady, unsettlingly patient. "I'm here to make sure you disappear." The words hit me like a blow. Disappear? What are you talking about? He pulled out a chair and sat down opposite me, the metal scraping against the floor echoing loudly in the small room. "You know what's happening out there, don't you? The calls you've been missing, the emails that never reached their destination, the friends who've stopped replying. It's not an accident." I stared, heart pounding. "What are you saying? That someone's deleting me? That I don't exist?" He nodded slowly. "Exactly. And I'm the one making sure no trace of you remains. No calls, no messages, no bank records. Just nothing. Like you never existed." The absurdity of it burned in my chest. "Why? Who would do that?" He looked away for a moment, jaw tight. "Someone who wants to erase you completely. To remove you from the world." I bit my lip, trying to steady my shaking hands. But why bring me here? Why not just finish it remotely? He smiled, but it was cold, empty of warmth. "Because you need to see it. Because you need to realize what's left behind when every record, every memory, every connection is wiped clean. You're going to watch as your life disappears." I swallowed again, the sickness rising in my throat. "You're insane." "Maybe. But I'm thorough." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a laptop, setting it down on the floor and flipping it open. The screen glowed blue in the dimness. He tapped a few keys, fingers moving with practiced speed. "You'll see the proof soon enough," he said. "Every account, every photograph, every message you've ever sent or received, it's all going away. And there's nothing you can do to stop it." I felt tears sting my eyes. but I blinked them back. Fear was starting to settle in properly now, cold and heavy. Who are you? What have I done? He shrugged. You don't know yet. But you will. And by the time I'm done, no one will. The laptop screen flickered, then filled with a series of windows, bank statements, email inboxes, social media profiles, all flashing up before me. I saw my name, my face, the digital breadcrumbs I'd left everywhere suddenly being erased. Files deleted, accounts closed, contacts vanished. I shivered, realizing that this was no random act of violence. This was a calculated erasure, a systematic unmaking of a person. Why show me this? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He leaned in, his eyes cold and hard. Because watching your life unravel is part of your punishment. You'll understand what it means to truly be alone. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked away. The room felt smaller, suffocating. I was trapped here, caught between the fading light of my digital existence and the stark darkness of this basement. And the worst part was knowing that somewhere out there, everyone I knew was slowly forgetting I ever existed, and I was powerless to stop it. The dull ache in my wrists pulsed in sync with my rising panic. The room was small, bare concrete walls, a low ceiling that pressed down on me. The faint hum of a flickering bulb overhead was the only sound besides the occasional drip of water echoing somewhere beyond the walls. I couldn't see any windows, no doors, no sign of an escape. Only the dim light and the smell of damp concrete and stale air. My hands were numb, but as I shifted, I caught a faint metallic scent. Oil, maybe. I guess the handcuffs were old but well maintained, not the kind someone left to rust. Whoever had me wasn't sloppy. They thought this through. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down. It wasn't the time to panic. I needed information. Slowly, I remembered the last thing I'd seen before waking up here, the blank phone screen. No message from Sarah, no missed calls, nothing. My phone wasn't with me. Whoever took me had taken it or destroyed it. The realization settled like a stone in my stomach. They wanted me cut off. Completely. The sound of the metal door creaking open startled me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I twisted my head toward the noise, straining in the dark to see who was coming. A figure stepped into the light, tall, lean, wearing a dark jacket with the collar pulled up. They didn't speak at first, just stood there watching me. The flickering bulb illuminated their face in uneven patches, clean-shaven, sharp features, ice cold but calculating. You're awake, they said finally, voice low and steady. Who are you? What do you want from me? I managed, forcing my voice to stay firm despite the fear. They smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm not here to hurt you. Not physically, anyway. But you're in a situation far worse than just being tied up. I swallowed. Then what? Why am I here? They stepped closer, pulling a small laptop from a satchel. The screen lit up, casting a bluish glow across their face. The keyboard clattered as they typed quickly. I want you to watch. To understand. Because very soon, no one outside will remember you ever existed. I blinked, confusion and disbelief warring inside me. What are you talking about? They didn't answer immediately. Instead, they tapped a few keys and pushed the laptop screen toward me, making sure I could see. The display showed a social media page, my profile. Friends, photos, status updates, all there. Then, with a few swift clicks, the profile vanished. Deleted, they said. I stared, mouth dry. You can't just delete me. I have a life. People will notice. That's the thing, they said, leaning back against the wall. I'm making sure no one notices. Every account you have, every trace of your existence online, gone. How? Why? Panic rising again despite myself. They shrugged. I'm not interested in money. Ransom's too easy, too obvious. Those calls, texts, they're all blocked before they leave your phone. I stopped your last message from reaching Sarah. Your contacts won't get a hint. I swallowed hard. Who are you? What do you want? They looked away for a moment, then back. I'm someone you crossed. Not in the way you think. No threats, no violence. Just erasing you from the digital world, piece by piece. And you're going to watch it happen. My breath hitched in my throat. Why should I? What happens if I don't? They smiled thinly. You won't like that answer. But you don't have a choice. You'll watch. Because if you don't, their gaze sharpened. You won't exist anywhere. Not to anyone. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my eyes back to the laptop screen, still glowing faintly. I was powerless. Helpless. The chain rattled as I tugged at my wrists. The cage light flickered again, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. The figure tapped a few keys and brought up another window, my bank accounts. Numbers, statements, transactions, all exposed. Then, they began deleting things, closing accounts. With every click, a part of my life disappeared. My paycheck, my rent, my credit cards rendered useless. No more payments, no money, no bills, the kidnapper said with a smirk. Soon, you'll be a ghost. Unreachable, untraceable. I fought the tears, the hopelessness that threatened to consume me. Please, I whispered. This isn't real. You can't do this. They leaned in close, voice low but fierce. I can. And I will. The hours dragged on. The handcuffs chafed against my skin, the numbness in my wrists deepened. The chain rattled with every small move I made. Outside this room, my life unraveled piece by piece, and I was forced to watch helplessly. At one point, I heard voices beyond the metal door, muffled, indistinct. They didn't come in. Whoever was out there was part of this. I wasn't alone in this nightmare, but I was isolated. I tried to memorize every detail of the room, every sound, every pattern of the flickering light. If I ever got out, I would need all of it. When the kidnapper finally closed the laptop and stood, they said, "There's more to erase. And more to take away. But I'm giving you a choice. Watch, or don't. But remember, if you look away, you lose everything faster. If you close your eyes, you lose time." I nodded numbly, the weight of my situation crashing down on me. I was living a slow, deliberate erasure of my existence. And worse, I was the audience. Alone with my fading world, I realized the worst wasn't the chains, the dark, or even the disappearance of my digital life. It was the terrifying certainty that no one would come for me. That I was being wiped away, piece by piece, until I was nothing but a ghost trapped in a concrete room. The kidnappers' footsteps faded as they left the room, the door clanging shut behind them. I was left with the cold, the silence, and the slow, merciless countdown of my own erasure. I whispered to the darkness, to no one, "I'm still here. I'm still here." But the silence didn't answer. I had been sitting on the cold concrete floor of the basement for what felt like hours, maybe more, staring at the flickering bulb overhead, waiting and listening. Then the door creaked open. A sliver of pale light spilled into the darkness, and a figure stepped inside. The person's face was still mostly hidden in shadow, but as they closed the door behind them, I caught a glimpse of a casually worn hoodie, jeans, an older model phone clipped to their belt. Not the type of guy who'd be interested in ransom. No angry demands, no desperate voices. Just cold, methodical movement. "You're awake," the voice said, calm, almost bored. I swallowed hard. "Why am I here? What do you want?" The figure moved closer, crouching down so we were eye level. I could see their eyes now, dark, steady, without a hint of empathy. "You're going to watch," they said plainly. "Watch what?" "Everything you ever were, everything you ever touched, erased." My heart slammed against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" They didn't answer right away. Instead, I heard the faint clatter of keys being pulled from a pocket. Then, the sound of a laptop booting up. "Look at this," they said, sliding the device across the floor toward me. Despite my cuffs, I managed to reach out and touch the edge of the cold machine. The screen glowed, and I saw it, an open browser tab, Google search results for my name. At first, it looked normal enough, my LinkedIn profile, a few news articles about projects I'd worked on, a Twitter account I barely used. But then the person clicked through the pages with swift, practiced fingers. "We've already started," they said, voice low. "See these sites? They'll be gone soon." "Gone?" I blinked, staring as one by one, the tabs closed themselves, or rather, the pages loaded to a blank screen, then an error message, 404 not found. Web pages I had bookmarked, social media profiles, even some online articles that mentioned me, all vanishing like smoke. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Why me?" They shrugged, eyes never leaving the screen. "Because you matter. Or mattered. The world needs to forget you." I shook my head, disbelief and terror twisting inside me. "What does that even mean? Who are you to decide that?" The stranger leaned back on their heels, fingers steepled. "I'm the shadow no one sees. The eraser no one hears coming. You're a problem, and problems get solved." "Solved?" I echoed. "By kidnapping me? By torturing me with this?" "No torture," they said smoothly. "Just control. You'll see what it means to disappear. But first, you have to witness it." They tapped a few keys, and a new page loaded, my bank account interface. The balance was shrinking rapidly, money being siphoned out in small increments, untraceable transfers to unknown accounts. "Your life is being liquidated," the voice explained. "Every asset, every connection. Your friends will think you vanished, your company will remove you from the records, your online presence wiped clean. No trace." "Why?" I whispered. "Why do this?" The person's face darkened with something like frustration, but it disappeared quickly. "Because some debts can't be paid with money. Some mistakes come with a price that can't be erased by lawyers or courts." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my panic from breaking through. Who do you work for? What mistake?" They shook their head. "Not who. What? Your existence is a threat. And threats have to be eliminated." I glanced back at the screen. My phone number was next. The caller logs were being deleted, text messages vanished. The person clicked again and a map appeared showing my home, with a blinking red dot over it. "Your apartment will be empty by the time this is done," they said quietly. "Everything packed up or tossed out." I closed my eyes, trying to process. So I'm supposed to just sit here and watch this happen? What if someone looks for me? They smiled thinly. "They won't. We've made sure of that." I looked back up, noticing the faint sound of a phone ringing somewhere in the room. The kidnapper picked up their own device and silenced it without a glance. "My name's not important," they said. "What you need to know is that your family, Your friends, they won't hear from you again. You'll become a ghost. I shuddered, the weight of it sinking in. What if I scream? What if I fight? They shrugged. No one will believe you. No one will find you. You're alone in this. The laptop clicked again, and a final page loaded, a news site with a headline about a missing person, someone with my description, but not my name. A fabricated story, carefully crafted. The article detailed a supposed voluntary disappearance, a midlife crisis, a sudden flight from responsibilities. Your story, the kidnapper said, voice almost gentle. You'll become a footnote, a cautionary tale. But no one will know the truth. I clenched my fists, the cold metal biting into my skin. You don't get to erase me. The person leaned in closer, eyes cold but focused. I already am. Then, they stood abruptly and moved to the door. Before leaving, they glanced back once. Watch closely. Your past is being buried. And soon, no one will remember you ever existed. The door shut with a heavy thud, plunging me back into darkness, save for the pale glow of the laptop screen. The sound of the keyboard continued, relentless and merciless. I was disappearing, and I was powerless to stop it. The door creaked open before I could even catch my breath, a sharp rasp that sliced through the thick silence of the basement. Don't try anything, the voice was low, calm. Not angry, but resolute, like someone reciting facts they'd rehearsed too many times. We're past that point. I swallowed hard, my tongue thick in my mouth. Why am I here? What do you want from me? My voice cracked, the words almost foreign in my ears. The person stopped a few feet away, the faint light catching the edges of a face I was starting to dread recognizing. Not ransom, they said, almost as if reading my thoughts. You won't be coming back. This isn't about money. The handcuffs bit into my wrists as I shifted, the metal cold and unforgiving. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest felt like it was folding in on itself. Then what? Why lock me up? They sighed, a sound heavy with some mixture of frustration and something I couldn't place. Because I need you to see it. To understand. I frowned, confusion knotting my gut. See what? Understand what? The figure moved closer, and with the light behind them, their features still blurred. I caught a glimpse of tired eyes that didn't hold the glint of a casual criminal. This was something else entirely. I'm erasing you, they said plainly. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What? Every trace, every link, every thread of you in the world outside this basement. And I want you to watch it happen. I coughed a laugh, sharp and bitter. That's insane. You can't just. I can and I will, they interrupted, voice firm. I've already started. I swallowed again, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my ribcage. Why? Who do you think you are? They came closer, crouching so their face was inches from mine. Someone who knows what you're capable of. Someone who knows what you've done. The air grew thick with the weight of their words. I shook my head, trying to piece it together. I don't understand. You don't have to, they said softly. But you will see. Over the next hour, they worked methodically. Not to harm me, at least, not physically, but to peel back the layers of my existence, bit by bit. I watched helplessly as they pulled out a laptop from a battered bag, plugged it into a wall socket that sparked faintly, and began typing with an urgency that was almost surgical. The screen glowed coldly in the dim room. First, there were emails, deleted, wiped from servers I didn't even know I was connected to. Then social media accounts, one by one, vanished into the digital ether. Contacts, friends, work profiles. Each keystroke felt like a scalpel slicing through the fabric of my identity. I asked questions desperately, hopelessly, trying to find a way out or some explanation that made sense. But the person answered only in clipped, precise sentences. No bank accounts, they said, blocking access to my online banking and credit cards. No phone number, they continued, deleting my digital footprint from carrier databases. No address, no utility bills, no leases. They made it clear they were methodical in their approach, leaving nothing to chance. You'll become a ghost, they said, voice devoid of malice but full of certainty. Nobody will find you. Nobody will know you ever existed. I tried to process it. My life, my whole identity, being stripped away, piece by piece. It was terrifying, but also surreal. Was this some sick game? A vendetta? I searched their face for a hint. They hesitated, and for the first time, a flicker of something else flashed in their eyes, regret. I didn't want it to be like this, they admitted quietly. But you left me no choice. Who are you? I whispered, voice raw. They hesitated again, then said, I'm someone you destroyed. I blinked, mind racing through every conversation, every interaction in my recent past. No threats, no enemies, not that I knew of. You don't know, they said, almost gently. Not yet. The hours blurred as my captor continued their grim task. Outside, I could hear the faint hum of the city, distant sirens, the occasional car passing by. But down here, in this concrete tomb, time twisted and folded in on itself. My wrists ached, skin raw where the cuffs bit in. By late afternoon, the erasure was nearly complete. My digital existence was a void. No friends to call, no family to reach. Even my employer's servers reflected nothing, my accounts wiped clean. It was like I'd been vaporized from the world I'd known. I realized then what this was about. It wasn't just kidnapping. It was obliteration. An execution of identity. The person stood back, watching me, waiting for a reaction. What now? I finally asked, voice hoarse. They met my gaze steadily. Now, you remember who you are without the world's permission. A shiver ran down my spine. I don't understand. You will, they said, and the door opened once more. A man stepped in, carrying a small, battered suitcase. He nodded to my captor and began unpacking, thick envelopes, a stack of printed photos, a manila folder stamped with my name. My captor explained without looking away from me, these are your last links to your old life. People you trusted, places you thought were safe. You'll forget them soon enough. My throat tightened. The images were of Sarah, my sister, my friends, co-workers, all with faces frozen in time. The folder contained letters, medical records, bank statements, proof of my existence. Why are you showing me this? I asked, dread curling in my stomach. Because once I'm done, you'll be a blank slate. Your past is about to become a prison you can't escape. These memories will be all you have left. I stared at them, cold and unyielding. Is this your punishment? No, my captor replied quietly. It's survival. The weight of those words crushed me. Survival. Like I was some disease or a threat to be eradicated. They moved toward the door. Rest now. Tomorrow, the final step begins. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving me alone again. I sat back against the wall, the cold concrete pressing into my spine. My wrists burned, my head spun with the enormity of what had just happened. I wasn't just kidnapped. I was being erased. And the worst part was knowing that no one on the outside would ever know to look for me. I closed my eyes and tried to remember everything, the faces, the voices, the life I had. Because soon, even those memories might be taken from me. The basement was silent except for the faint hum of the flickering light above, and the steady, unyielding tick of time slipping away. The chain clinked quietly as I moved my wrist, the metal cold and unyielding. I'd been here for what felt like hours, maybe longer. The kidnapper hadn't shown themselves since the last time, when they'd spoken for the first time. Their voice was disturbingly calm, void of the usual threats or demands. Instead, they'd said, "You're going to watch, and there's nothing you can do about it." I didn't understand what that meant back then. Now, as I lay on the cold floor, the meaning was chillingly clear. Minutes later, the lights overhead flickered again. Footsteps echoed on the concrete stairs, deliberate and slow. A shadow appeared at the stairwell's mouth, a tall figure silhouetted against the dim hallway light. The door creaked, and then the figure descended, carrying a laptop bag. "Got your entertainment for the night," they said without looking at me, their voice low and steady, tinged with a cold detachment. They set the bag down, unzipping it with methodical precision, pulling out a laptop and a small speaker. My heart thumped painfully against my ribs. I wanted to scream, to beg, to plead, but the lump in my throat refused to budge. They turned on the laptop, the blue glow illuminating their cold, unreadable face. They glanced at me briefly, then started typing rapidly. Lines of code and commands filled the screen, a cascade of technical jargon I only partly understood. My mind tried to catch up. What are you doing?" I managed to croak. The kidnapper didn't look up immediately. When they did, their eyes were sharp but distant. "Erasing you," they said simply. "Not from this room, not from me. From everyone else. From the world you knew." I swallowed hard, disbelief and terror warring inside me. Why? Why are you doing this?" They shrugged, as if the question were absurd. "Because you have to disappear. Because it's not about money. It's about making sure you don't exist anymore." The laptop screen shifted. I saw social media accounts, my profiles, disappearing one by one. Photos wiped clean, friends lists erased. Email accounts vanished, messages deleted before my eyes. It was a digital execution, relentless and absolute. I clenched my fists despite the cuffs. "You can't do that," I said, voice cracking. "People will notice." "Sarah will." The kidnapper cut me off. "Sarah won't. I've made sure of that. No one will be able to find you. No one will know where you went. You're a ghost now." I tried to wrap my head around it. If they could do this much damage to my digital existence, what else could they control? My bank accounts? My phone? Every trace I'd ever left behind? The thought tightened in my chest. This wasn't just kidnapping. It was a slow erasure, a methodical dismantling of my identity. "Why?" I whispered, voice barely audible. They closed the laptop with a soft snap and looked directly at me, eyes cold and unblinking. "Because you know too much. Because I can't let you talk." The weight of those words hit me like a physical blow. The pieces I hadn't connected before settled into place. This wasn't random. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was calculated. The kidnapper stood, pacing once before sitting on a metal chair opposite me, hands folded over their knees. "You need to understand something," they said. "The world doesn't owe you anything. You made choices, important ones. And now, you have to pay for them." "What choices?" I asked, desperation creeping in. They smiled faintly, the expression almost mocking. "You'll remember soon enough. When the time is right." I shook my head, confusion and fear swirling. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I knew that waiting was dangerous. The hours dragged on. The kidnapper returned to the laptop periodically, continuing their digital perch. I tried to focus on the faint sounds from outside, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, but those sounds were becoming less familiar, less connected to me. At one point, I heard the kidnapper speaking to a phone, giving terse instructions. The name Sarah came up, and I tensed, hoping against hope they hadn't hurt her. "They're making sure she won't ask questions," the kidnapper said, voice low but audible. My stomach dropped. They weren't just erasing me, they were erasing everyone who mattered to me, breaking the connections that would lead back to me. Hours later, exhaustion weighed heavily on me. The kidnapper packed up the laptop and speaker with the same mechanical precision as before and stood. "Sleep now," they said. "You'll need your strength." I didn't dare argue. The shadows seemed to swallow the room as they left, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. Left alone, I closed my eyes and tried to remember not just my past, but what the kidnapper meant by my choices. There had to be something, some thread I was missing. Because if I truly ceased to exist in the eyes of the world, what was left of me here in this basement? The answer would have to wait. But I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't going to let myself disappear. Not without a fight. A quiet resolve settled over me, sharper than fear. Tomorrow, I'd start piecing together the fragments, no matter the cost. Story 3, Silent Watcher, Haunting Presence at Midnight Station. I got to the station after midnight, the sky above a blur of dark clouds and the occasional flicker of distant lightning. The platform lay deserted. The walls were stained with years of crime, and the metal benches were cold and unwelcoming. Every few minutes, the wind would pick up, whistling through the empty station and rattling the old signage overhead. I glanced at my phone. 39 minutes until the next train. I had no signal, and the battery was barely holding on. Alone, stranded, and tense. I tried to keep calm. I told myself it was just a late-night wait, nothing more. But then I noticed it, a shadowy figure standing near the far end of the platform. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or a haphazard pile of trash. But the figure didn't shift or move like debris caught in the breeze. It was standing still, watching. I couldn't get a clear look in the dim light, but the outline was unmistakably human. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a late-night worker or a homeless person seeking shelter. But no one else was around, and the way the figure stood rigid and silent felt unnatural. I squinted, trying to make out any features. The figure was tall, possibly male, wearing dark clothing that blended almost seamlessly with the night. Then, a train pulled in on the opposite track, its arrival stirred the platform into motion. A handful of passengers disembarked, 3 men, 2 women. They glanced around briefly, then hurried off the platform towards the exit or the station lobby. I watched closely. The shadowy figure didn't move. It waited. As the last passenger disappeared, the figure stepped forward slowly, pacing the length of the platform, stopping briefly as if inspecting the empty benches, then retreating to the far end. I began to notice a pattern. Each time a train came in and passengers disembarked, the figure would appear or move to a new spot near the crowd, always silent, always watching, but never stepping onto the train itself. It never boarded, never approached anyone. Just watched. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Something about the figure's behavior was deliberate, calculated even. No one else seemed to notice it. The passengers all seemed oblivious, their attention focused on getting home or catching connecting trains. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the figure was a security guard or a plainclothes officer. But I saw no badge, no equipment, no official clothing. Just a person lurking, patient and still. The train pulled away, and the platform emptied again. I was alone with the shadow. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the warmth of the jacket. The figure stayed in place, unblinking, watching the empty platform. Minutes stretched on. I kept my eyes on the figure, every instinct screaming to move away, to get out of that station. But where? The next train was still half an hour away, and the surrounding streets were deserted. I considered calling a cab. My phone buzzed, but the screen was a blank notification from some app one didn't recognize. No signal for calls or texts. I tried to stand, to at least move closer to the station building. The shadow didn't follow but shifted slightly, staying always between me and the exit. I felt trapped. When the next train finally arrived, 2 more passengers got off, a man with a briefcase and a young woman wearing headphones. They hurried past the figure without noticing it. The figure watched them closely but didn't approach or board. Then it walked along the platform, moving silently to the edge, peering down the tracks. I kept my distance but watched every move. The figure turned its head slowly, as if sensing my gaze, then froze. Our eyes met briefly, or at least I thought so. The silhouette was too dark to see details, just the outline of a face partly obscured by a hood. I swallowed hard. I wanted to call out, to ask if the person needed help or was waiting for someone else, but my voice caught in my throat. The rational part of me told me to leave, yet the train was still a long way off. Time bled into itself. The platform lights flickered overhead. I felt like a trapped animal, aware of a predator nearby, watching, waiting. The figure remained motionless again, an ominous presence hanging in the dim light. Eventually, the last train of the night was scheduled to arrive. I realized something with a cold jolt. The earlier passengers had all left the station quickly, but this figure never left. It didn't board any train, didn't leave, just stayed on the platform. The thought hit me hard, what if it was waiting for someone to be alone? For someone like me. I glanced around. The station was silent except for the distant rumble of an approaching train. The shadowy figure was still there, unmoving. I had no idea who it was or what it wanted. But I knew I had to be the next one off that platform, or I wouldn't leave at all. My heart pounded as the train's headlights pierced the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows. The figure's outline sharpened, a tall coat, a hat pulled low. Was it a guardian or a threat? I stepped back, gripping the railing, every instinct screaming to run. Yet, something frozen in its gaze held me rooted in place. The minutes crawled past like hours. I tried to tell myself the figure was harmless. Maybe a station worker taking a smoke break, or someone waiting for a late arrival. But something didn't sit right. The way it never moved, except to shift slightly when a passenger stepped down, was unsettling. I had watched the figure do the same thing at every train, follow the new arrival silently, trailing them with an eerie precision, and then retreat back to its spot without boarding any train itself. No one else seemed to notice. After the 3rd train, I realized I was the only one who paid attention. The other passengers busied themselves with their phones, hurried down the stairs, or made small talk. The figure was invisible to them, or maybe they just chose to ignore it. I wasn't sure which was worse. I edged closer, keeping my distance but trying to get a better look. The dim platform lights cast long shadows, and the figure's features remained indistinct, just a tall shape, slightly hunched, wearing a long coat that looked threadbare. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. The figure's face was obscured by a hood, but I caught a glimpse of a pale, gaunt cheek every time it turned. My heartbeat quickened when I noticed the figure wasn't just following passengers, it was watching them intently. Not with casual curiosity, but with something colder, calculating, maybe even predatory. The next train came in, and I counted 4 passengers stepping onto the platform. The figure moved again, silent and fluid, following the group like a hunter stalking prey. One of the passengers, a young woman with bright red hair, paused near a bench. The figure stopped, a breath away, as if waiting for something. The woman glanced around nervously, pulled out her phone, and quickly hurried off. But the figure didn't move on. It lingered there, watching. I felt my stomach knot with dread. What was it waiting for? Why didn't it just board a train like everyone else? And why did it follow those who did? I checked my watch. Another 30 minutes before my train arrived. I was trapped in this place with a predator whose intentions I couldn't decipher. The platform lights flickered overhead, casting the shadowy figure in an unsettling, wavering glow. I debated moving closer again, but the rational part of me screamed to get away. This wasn't an armless drifter or a lost commuter. This was something else. I stepped back, towards the station entrance, and my foot caught on a loose piece of concrete. I stumbled, and the figure's head snapped in my direction. For a split second, I met eyes with it, dark, cold, and unreadable. Then the figure vanished into the shadows near the stairwell. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I couldn't tell if it had actually moved or if it was a trick of the light. But my instinct screamed that it was closer than I thought. Another train came in, empty this time, and I watched the figure reappear at its usual spot. It didn't get on. Instead, it stood motionless, as if waiting. I realized then that the figure was baiting the passengers, maybe trying to separate someone from the group. The thought made my skin crawl. Across the platform, the security camera flickered weakly, its red light blinking. I doubted anyone was watching. The station was too old, too neglected. I had no idea why this place was still open this late, but I wasn't about to find out the hard way. I pressed my phone against my ear, hoping for a signal. Nothing. My eyes darted around. The shadowy figure was still there, a silent menace in the darkness. I had to warn someone. But who? My voice caught in my throat. As the night deepened, the platform grew colder, the wind cutting through my jacket like a blade. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stay calm. The next train was the last one before the station shut down for the night. 40 minutes away. I was alone with the shadow. And I was running out of time. I tried to think back, retracing my steps. Had I seen anyone else near the station? No. The streets were dead, the station deserted. If this figure was waiting here all night, it had no way to escape except through the trains. But it never boarded. Why? A sudden thought hit me. Maybe it wasn't waiting to leave, but waiting for someone to stay behind. The idea was terrifying. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. The figure remained rooted to the spot, as if it had been carved from the darkness itself. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed. My mind raced. Was it stalking me too? I tried to recall every detail. The coat long, worn, with frayed edges. The gait slow, deliberate, almost like pacing. The hands, I hadn't seen them fully, but they looked rough, scarred maybe. My breath came out in short, visible puffs. I knew I had to get out of there before the last train arrived. But how? The platform was a dead end. The stairwell was dark and deserted. And the shadow was waiting. I considered the emergency phone fixed to the wall. Maybe I could call for help. I approached cautiously, keeping my eyes on the figure. It didn't move. My fingers trembled as I picked up the receiver. No dial tone. I slammed it down, heart pounding. I had to think. I scanned the platform for anything I could use. A discarded metal rod lay near the bench. I grabbed it, feeling its cold weight. The shadow shifted slightly. I froze. Then it took a slow step forward. My grip tightened on the rod. A surge of adrenaline flooded me. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not tonight. The figure stopped, head tilted slightly, as if considering me. Then it turned and disappeared into the darkness beneath the stairwell. I waited, breath held, listening for any sound. Only the distant rumble of traffic beyond the station. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew one thing. I couldn't let that figure catch me. Not until I was safely on that last train. And as the night stretched on, I realized something more. That maybe I was the only one left who could escape. Before it was too late. The night dragged on, each minute thicker than the last, like syrup poured slow and cold. The clock on the station wall flickered. 45 minutes past midnight. The next train was scheduled to arrive in just under 20 minutes, but I wasn't at all sure I'd want to board it. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself. The wind had picked up again, a biting chill that pierced through the thin fabric and made me shiver. My phone was dead. No signal, no light, no help. All I had was the dull orange glow of the platform's aging lamps and the distant rumble of an approaching train. From the corner of my eye, I caught a movement. A passenger had appeared down the tunnel, stepping onto the platform with sleepy, distracted steps. A man in a dark hoodie, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes flickering briefly over the empty platform. I tensed. And then I saw it. The figure, the shadow, was there again, stepping silently from its perch. It followed the man, keeping the same distance, a deliberate shadow stalking its prey. The man paused near one of the benches, looking around. He hesitated, then sat down and pulled out a phone, fingers tapping rapidly. The shadow loomed just behind him, unmoving, nearly blending with the darkness, but unmistakably there. I swallowed hard. It was like a predator pacing its territory, waiting for the moment to strike, but it never did. The shadow didn't board the train, it didn't interact. It just watched. I held my breath as the train's screeching brakes shattered the night. Doors slid open with a hiss, lights flooding the platform. The man bolted up, stepping briskly toward the train. The shadow moved with him, close and silent. Then, at the very last second, the man stopped. He glanced behind him, almost as if sensing the presence. The shadow froze, a statue in the flood of light. The man's eyes flicked to it then, with a sudden sharp intake of breath, he spun away from the train and fled toward the station exit. The shadow didn't move. The train doors began to close. And I realized the shadow wasn't just following people. It was deciding who got on the train, who got away. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. I stepped back from the edge of the platform, suddenly dizzy. The wind howled through the station, rattling the trash bins and sending a cold mist swirling. The train pulled away, lights disappearing into the tunnel. The platform was empty again, save for me and the shadowy figure, standing unmoved. I wanted to scream at the shadow, to demand it leave me alone, but my voice caught in my throat. My legs trembled beneath me. I had no idea who or what it was. No idea what it wanted. But I knew I didn't want to be the next person it decided to follow. I scanned the platform for an escape route. The station exit was a good 100 yards away, and the only other option was a dark stairwell leading up to the street level. Both seemed equally risky. I considered hiding behind one of the ticket machines, but the shadow's presence was too commanding. It seemed to own the night, the platform, the very air. I felt like a trespasser in a place it ruled. Minutes stretched on, the air thick with tension. I kept glancing back at the figure, but it hadn't moved. It was waiting, watching, like a silent judge deciding who was worthy to leave and who wasn't. The truth hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't some random homeless person or a late-night worker. It was a hunter. A predator. And I was its prey. Then another train arrived, this one empty. No passengers stepped off. No one to follow. The shadow moved again, pacing slowly along the platform's length, eyes or whatever they were fixed on me. I swallowed my fear and took a step back. The shadow mirrored me, closing the distance. My pulse quickened. I didn't dare run. I didn't dare show panic. I had to think. I remembered the emergency phone on the far side of the platform, near the stairwell. If I could make it there, maybe I could alert someone. Maybe there was a way to call for help. I started walking, slow and steady, eyes locked on the shadow. It followed, flawless in silence. Halfway there, I passed a vending machine and grabbed a soda, hoping the clattering sound would mask my movements. The shadow paused, then continued. I reached the emergency phone and lifted the receiver. A crackling hiss, then silence. No dial tone. Nothing. I slammed the receiver down, heart sinking. The shadow was closer now. I could see the glint of eyes beneath a hooded coat. Male. Probably in his 30s or 40s. Face pale in the dim light, but no smile. Just cold, calculating intent. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall. The platform suddenly felt like a cage. The sound of footsteps echoed. Not mine. Another person? But there was no one else here. Suddenly, a woman stepped out from the stairwell, her face pale and drawn. She looked at me, then at the shadow, eyes wide with terror. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, voice trembling. He watches. He waits for people to get off the trains. Then he chooses who leaves. No one escapes once he's set his sights." I shook my head, heart racing. "What do you mean? Who is he?" She glanced over her shoulder nervously. "A predator. He's been here for weeks, maybe months. No one talks about him, but he's why people disappear at night, why no one takes this train after midnight anymore." I tried to process the words. Disappear? This shadow wasn't just watching, it was controlling who lived and who vanished into the night. "Why?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. She looked at me like I was crazy. "Why don't you run now? Before it's too late?" Behind us, the shadow's steps grew louder. The woman grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the stairwell. We ran. Up the stairs, into the street, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. The woman led me to a nearby payphone, the faint buzz of the city around us. She dialed a number and spoke rapidly into the receiver. I looked back at the station. The platform lights flickered. The shadow was gone. For now. I realized then that the night wasn't just a waiting game. It was a trap. And I might have just been the last person left who could escape. But the question that haunted me was this: how many others hadn't? The night stretched on, dragging its weight across the empty platform like thick molasses. I kept my eyes on the platform's far end, where that shadowy figure had been lurking since I arrived. It hadn't moved an inch, still cloaked in the dim glow of the flickering overhead lights. The figure wasn't just standing, it was waiting, watching. Every few minutes, as a train arrived and a handful of passengers stepped onto the platform, the figure would emerge from the darkness, stepping silently behind each newcomer. It never spoke or interacted. It never boarded the train. just followed. I watched the pattern develop and my stomach twisted tighter with every new arrival. The first passenger was a young woman, her arms wrapped tight around a small duffel bag. She glanced nervously over her shoulder as the figure closed in, its pace slow but deliberate. The moment she noticed, her eyes widened, and she broke into a jog toward the station exit, not the platform. The figure paused, then dropped back into the shadows, still patient. Next came an older man, carrying a briefcase and wearing a threadbare coat. His steps faltered when he sensed the presence behind him. He quickened his pace, head down, but when he reached the exit stairs, he didn't run. Instead, he hesitated, looking back over his shoulder, eyes scanning the dark corner where the figure lingered. The man's lips moved, muttering something I couldn't hear. Then he disappeared inside the station. This cycle repeated with every new arrival. The figure followed silently, the passenger noticed and fled or avoided the platform altogether. No one boarded the train while the figure was near. No one stayed long enough to wait. I was next. I knew it. The realization slammed into me like a freight train. Everyone was stopping themselves from staying here, from becoming a target. The figure was testing, waiting for the right moment or maybe just to see who would break first. I hadn't looked away for even a second since it appeared. My heart hammered in my chest. The cold was sharp but nothing compared to the sudden rush of adrenaline. I considered running to the staff office or the emergency phone booth, but both were locked, long abandoned. No help would come from this station tonight. I gripped the edge of the rusted bench, knuckles white. The platform was silent except for the intermittent rumble of distant trains arriving and departing, bringing fresh faces just to scare them off again. Minutes passed. I told myself I was imagining things, that the figure had some explanation, maybe a security guard or a homeless person with a mental illness. But none of the faces it followed seemed familiar, and no one was boarding. No one except me, if I stayed. I tried to read the figure's silhouette more closely. It was tall, slim, dressed in dark clothes that blended with the night. The hood was pulled low over its face, obscuring any detail. It didn't seem to carry a bag or any visible weapon, but the way it moved sent warning signals through my entire body. There was purpose and control to every step. I thought back to the stories I'd heard about stations like this, the ones that were off the map, abandoned, or forgotten by the city. Places where people disappeared or got mugged, far from the prying eyes of cameras or patrolling police. I had never believed them until now. This was no coincidence. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Was this figure a stalker? A predator looking for someone to isolate? The fact it didn't board the train suggested it wanted to trap people here, on the platform, away from escape routes. I swallowed hard. The train was due in less than 10 minutes. If I boarded, I might make it out. But what if it followed me on? What if it was waiting for me to get off at the next stop, or the one after? I scanned the platform again. The emergency exit door caught my eye. It was cracked open just a few inches, obscured by shadows. I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe it was unlocked. I moved cautiously toward it, trying to keep low and quiet. The figure didn't react, still standing motionless near the far end. The cold blast from outside hit me as I nudged the door wider with my foot. The alley beyond was narrow, littered with trash bins and piled newspapers. The street lamp at the corner flickered weakly. I stepped out, careful not to slam the door. If the figure noticed, I didn't want to give away my escape. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the brick walls. I glanced back toward the platform. The figure remained, unmoving, watching. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached the main street. The faint glow of neon signs illuminated the cracked pavement. People passed by, oblivious to the nightmare just behind me. I kept moving, heart pounding, lungs burning. I ducked into a 24-hour diner. The buzz of fluorescent lights and hushed conversations felt surreal after the oppressive silence of the station. The waitress gave me a curious look as I slid into a booth. "Rough night?" she asked, pouring coffee. I nodded, fingers trembling over the cup. I debated calling the police, but the signal was gone. I didn't even know what to say. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I started typing a description: shadowy figure, silent follower, abandoned train station. The hours blurred, but I knew one thing: I had escaped the immediate danger, but the figure was still out there somewhere. Waiting. Watching. And if I ever went back to that station, I might not be so lucky. I kept my eyes glued to the edge of the platform, heart hammering with every flicker of movement in the dim glow of the station's flickering overhead lights. Just before the next train pulled in, I saw it again. A solitary passenger stepped off the train, luggage rolling behind her, and the shadowy figure followed at a distance, silent and deliberate. The passenger glanced nervously at the empty platform but quickened her pace toward the exit stairs. The figure didn't board the train she came from, it stayed behind, watching her retreat into the shadows beyond the station. The door shut behind the woman, and the train pulled away, the platform now empty except for me and the figure. The pattern was unmistakable. Every arriving passenger was followed, never approached, never spoken to, just watched. And always, the figure never boarded any train. It was waiting. Waiting for something or someone. My thoughts spun in circles. How long had this been happening? Was I the only one who saw it? Did the other passengers even notice? I tried to tell myself this was paranoia, that the figure was just some late-night station employee or a security guard taking an unusual shift. But that didn't hold up. I was sure the station was unstaffed after midnight. And the figure's silence, the way it lingered like a predator watching prey, didn't feel normal. The next train hissed to a stop, doors sliding open with a mechanical groan. A man stepped off, his shoulders hunched against the chill. The shadow followed, keeping a careful distance. The man glanced around, hesitated, then headed toward the ticket booth near the exit. The shadow halted, eyes, if it had eyes, fixed on the man's retreating back. I bit my lip, willing myself to stay calm. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the figure was someone waiting for a specific passenger, or maybe it was a security measure I didn't understand. But the longer I watched, the more the chill in my gut grew. Minutes dragged by, the station now feels colder, emptier. The wind picked up again, rattling the old signs. I checked my phone, still no signal, battery fading fast. My options were narrowing. I thought about leaving, walking out into the night, but the station was isolated, surrounded by empty streets and shuttered buildings. The next train could always be my only way out. But if the figure was following each passenger, and I was the only one left, what did that mean for me? I had a sudden impulse to move toward the station office. Maybe there'd be security cameras, or a place to call for help. I forced my legs to obey and started walking along the platform, eyes never leaving the figure. It didn't react or move toward me, but the unease settled deeper in my bones. Inside the office, the flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Dust hung heavy in the stale air. I rifled through drawers, found a dusty station logbook, a cracked radio unit, but no working phone or anything helpful. On a wall-mounted monitor, I caught a glimpse of static and gray fuzz. I tapped the screen, but it was dead. No cameras working, no contact to the outside. A sudden noise made me freeze, a faint shuffling and footsteps echoing down the platform. I peeked out the small window to see the figure moving. For the first time, it was no longer standing still. It was walking slowly toward where I stood. The shadow was taller than before, movements deliberate, controlled. My breath hitched. There was no mistaking it now. The figure was coming for me. I slammed the office door and turned the lock, fumbling to find anything to barricade it with. The footsteps grew louder, slow and steady, echoing on the concrete. I heard a faint scraping sound, metal against metal, like a blade being drawn or a crowbar sliding along the floor. Panic surged. I slammed my back against the door, willing the weak lock to hold. The figure's shadow loomed through the frosted glass panel. No words. No sounds except the soft, methodical breathing I imagined in my own mind. I tried to steady my breathing. My phone was almost dead. No calls for help. No friends nearby. No one would come until morning. And if this person was what I feared, a predator waiting for the right moment to strike, I had no choice but to outthink them. I scanned the office again. Among the clutter, I found a heavy metal flashlight. It wasn't much, but it could be a weapon. I gripped it tightly, listening as the shadow tapped lightly on the door with a gloved hand, the tapping slow, like a warning or a test. "You don't want to do this," I said, voice trembling but loud. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched. Then a low voice, calm, even almost too calm, answered from the other side. "I'm not here to hurt you. Just to talk." My heart twisted. Talk? After all this? I hesitated but held the flashlight up like a shield. "Why are you following everyone?" I demanded. "What do you want?" The voice chuckled softly, a sound without warmth. "I watch. I wait. Sometimes people notice. Sometimes they don't. You're different." I wanted to slam the door and run, but what if that just provoked him? I had to keep him talking, keep him distracted. "Why me?" I asked. There was a pause, then the voice came lower, almost a whisper. "Because you're the last one. The last to leave." The door rattled as a hand tried the handle. Locked tight. "I don't want trouble," I said. "Just let me go." His voice was a breath now, distant but close. "No one leaves here without me knowing." The lights flickered, then went dark, plunging the office into near pitch blackness. I raised the flashlight, sweeping its beam across the room, heart racing. The shadow outside vanished from sight. Minutes passed. The silence outside was thick, oppressive. I kept the door locked, waiting for the first signs of dawn, for the station to fill with people again, or for the nightmare to end. I wasn't sure if I'd make it. But one thing was clear: I was alone, and I was running out of time. Story 4: Silent Borrowers, Haunting Neighbor Demands. It started with the garden shears. I remember the exact night I noticed them for the first time. I was sitting on my porch, nursing a lukewarm beer after a long day of work, when the porch light flickered on across the street. The house was an old Victorian that had stood vacant for years, a place most of us in the neighborhood called the eyesore. But then, one evening about 2 weeks prior, a moving van pulled up and the new neighbors arrived. They were a married couple. I later learned their names were Paul and Grace. Neither of them spoke much the first night, but the next day, Grace was out in the yard, trimming the hedges with garden shears that looked ancient. I had a pair of my own, tucked away in the shed, and I thought maybe she needed a better set. What I didn't expect was that she'd ring my doorbell at nearly midnight, asking to borrow mine. I remember thinking it was strange, but a little oddness in a new neighbor didn't bother me. I grabbed the shears from my toolbox and went over. The porch light bathed her face in an eerie glow. She looked tired, maybe a little anxious, but it was hard to read her expression in the dim light. "Thanks," she said quietly, taking the shears from me. "I'm sorry to bother you so late." I shrugged. "No problem." She glanced back at the house, like she was making sure no one was watching. "I'll have them back tomorrow." I nodded and went back inside, thinking nothing more of it. But the next night, at 11:30 p.m., the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Paul. "Do you have a ladder?" he asked. "A ladder?" "For the gutter. I need to check for leaks." I was half asleep, and something about the timing felt off. But I grabbed a folding ladder from my garage and carried it over. Paul took it without a word, then looked over his shoulder like he was expecting someone to pop out from behind the bushes. I handed it to him and went back inside. Over the next week, the requests became more frequent and more bizarre. At odd hours, they'd appear at my door asking to borrow things: a flashlight, a hammer, extension cords, a bottle of bleach, a set of jumper cables, a pressure cooker. Some items I couldn't understand the purpose of. Why borrow a pressure cooker at 2 a.m.? They never invited me over, and I never saw them leave the house during the day. The curtains were always drawn tight. I tried to chalk it up to the usual neighborly needs, but the constant late-night visits unsettled me. Sometimes I caught glimpses of their shadows moving behind the blinds, but only when the streetlights caught the windows just right. There were no signs of the usual comings and goings you'd expect from a couple settling into a new home: no lawn mowing, no mail piling up, no social visits with other neighbors. Then I started noticing patterns. The items they'd borrowed weren't random. Each request seemed to correlate with something going on in my life. When my car battery died, they were the first to ask for jumper cables. When I left the porch light on, they'd come knocking for a flashlight. Once, after a minor leak in my kitchen faucet, I found Paul at the door wanting to borrow wrenches. I felt watched. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Maybe I was just stressed from work. But then I found something disturbing. One afternoon, I was clearing out the garage when I stumbled on an envelope stuffed in a crack between the floorboards. It was addressed to me. Inside were photos taken from my front porch, my bedroom window, and even shots of the backyard where my dog liked to roam. The photos were dated months ago. I flipped through the pile, heart pounding. They had been watching me long before I noticed them. I didn't know how to react. At first, anger flared, then fear settled in. Who were these people? Why had they been spying on me? And more importantly, what did they want? Suddenly, the late-night visits took on a new, chilling meaning. They weren't just borrowing tools. They were checking, probing, learning my routines. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself listening for noises I had ignored before: the faint creak of floorboards, the rustling of curtains, footsteps outside my window. Every creak and groan of the old house sounded like a warning. The next day, I tried confronting Grace when she came over asking for a flashlight again. "Why do you need it so late?" I asked, forcing calm. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, power outages happen," she said vaguely. Better safe than sorry. I wanted to press her, but something in her tone stopped me. As the sun set, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. I realized I wasn't just living next to strange people. I was living next to predators, invisible but close. And they had been watching me for a long time. I started locking every door and window, double-checking every latch. I stopped answering the door after dark. But no matter how careful I was, the feeling of being observed clung to me like a shadow. Because the truth was, they knew everything about me already. And now, so did I. The line between hunter and hunted blurred, and I understood that survival meant becoming something I never thought I could be: unseen, untouchable, relentless. I didn't expect to see Grace again that night, but she came back. I blinked. Broken? How? She looked past me, toward the street as if expecting someone, then whispered, I don't know." They just snapped while I was cutting near the fence. It was odd, but I shrugged it off. Maybe the shears were old. I grabbed my toolbox, pulled out a pair of pliers and some wire, and went over to patch them up right there on my porch. Grace didn't say much, just kept glancing around, like she was waiting for something or someone to appear in the shadows. After I fixed the shears, I told her she could keep them until morning, but she shook her head. "I'll bring them back now." "Thank you." I figured that was the end of it. But it wasn't. The next night, it was the flashlight. Near midnight, Grace showed up again, this time holding a cheap, flickering flashlight. "Can I borrow yours?" "The batteries died," she said nervously. I was getting uneasy. This late-night borrowing was strange enough, but the way she avoided eye contact and kept checking the street made me feel like she was on edge. Still, I handed over my flashlight. It was just a damn flashlight, after all. What unsettled me more was that the couple, Paul, didn't come out often, but when he did, he was silent and distant, seemed to never leave the house during the day. I'd see them through the windows, moving behind curtains, but never outside. No lawn care, no mail pickup, no grocery runs. Nothing. The whole neighborhood was buzzing about the new neighbors, but nobody really knew anything. Rumors started, like how they had no kids, and Paul worked from home, but nothing concrete. This began to gnaw at me. I started paying closer attention. One afternoon on my way home, I noticed a delivery guy dropping off a couple of large boxes at their porch. They didn't answer the door. The guy looked around, shrugged, and left the packages there. I walked closer and peeked in through a side window. Inside, the house was dark, but I could make out rows of monitors, keyboards, and tangled cables set up in the living room. It looked like some kind of command center. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just a quiet, reclusive couple. Something about that setup felt off. I had no idea what they were doing, but it was definitely not normal. The borrowing escalated. One night, Grace asked for my phone charger because theirs wasn't working. Then it was kitchen knives, tape, sugar, a ladder. All at odd hours, always with that nervous flurry, always looking around like shadows were chasing them. I began keeping a log. Times, items borrowed, their behavior. It was obsessive, I know, but I couldn't help it. Something was wrong. And then, the pattern started to emerge. The borrowing coincided with strange noises, muffled voices, the sound of something scraping against metal, faint tapping. I started staying inside later, watching the house across the street from my living room window, my own house dimly lit to avoid attention. On the surface, it looked like a normal neighborhood. Kids playing in their yards, cars parked neatly along the street, the occasional dog walker. But the house where Paul and Grace lived was a fortress of silence and shadows. One night, I thought I heard yelling, low, angry murmurs behind those thick curtains. A woman's voice breaking, then quiet sobs. It hit me like a punch in the gut. Were they hiding something worse than odd hours and creepy borrowing? My gut twisted with unease, but curiosity got the better of me. I began looking for clues, old newspapers, public records, anything that might explain their behavior. The house had been vacant for years, but the previous owners left suddenly, no forwarding address. A few neighbors whispered about a missing person, but nothing official. I found it odd that the couple never took out the trash. Over a week passed, and the bins in front of their house stayed empty. No signs of garbage bags, no food deliveries. Nothing that would explain the boxes of electronics and random household items showing up. One afternoon, I spotted Paul out front for the first time. He was standing by the mailbox, staring down the street. When he saw me watching, he quickly turned and disappeared inside. His expression was unreadable, but something in his demeanor screamed, "Stay away." That was the last straw. I had to know what was going on. The house had a side gate that was slightly ajar that evening when I walked by. The porch light was off, the street was quiet. I'd never trespassed before, but the need to understand overpowered my caution. I slipped through the gate and made my way around to the backyard. The grass was overgrown, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and old leaves. As I moved closer to the back window, I saw a series of cameras mounted on the eaves, their lenses gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Cameras pointed all around the property, but also towards the street. Towards my house. I froze. They had been watching me. Watching me long before I even realized. I ran back to my porch and locked my door, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. The sense of intrusion was suffocating. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was suddenly a character in one of those true crime stories I used to laugh off. But this was real. And I hadn't even scratched the surface. The next day, I noticed a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single line written in shaky handwriting. "Don't watch us. We're watching you." That was the moment I understood the game had changed. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I was their target. And whatever they wanted from me was far darker than I could have imagined. I couldn't shake the creeping feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't just the borrowing. It was the timing. The items. The way they slipped into my life quietly, like shadows. The house across the street wasn't just a home anymore. It was a fortress, a cage, and I was beginning to realize I wasn't just a neighbor. I was their obsession. The first time I noticed something off was when I caught a glimpse of Paul standing behind the lace curtain in their living room, staring directly at my window. I was watering my plants, and his eyes didn't flinch when our gazes locked. Instead, he smiled, slow and tight-lipped, like he was savoring a secret. But I hadn't thought much of it then. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe a habit. But the coincidences piled up faster than I could keep track. One evening, I was at my kitchen table, eating a late dinner. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement across the street. Paul was out on their porch again, at an hour when no one should be. He was fiddling with what looked like a set of binoculars. I cursed myself for not noticing sooner. I wondered if he'd been watching me, waiting for me to slip up. A day later, Grace came by just before sunset. She asked for my extension cord, the one with the orange casing. She said she needed it to fix a lamp. It was strange, considering how many lights they left on inside their house, a blinding glow I could see through their windows, despite the curtains. I let her borrow it, but on my way back, I caught sight of a camera mounted at the corner of their porch. A small, discreet black box that didn't look like a weather sensor or any usual security device. It was angled toward my house. I felt the weight of my skin crawl. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That my neighbors were watching me? That they came knocking for random things at strange hours? Without proof, I was nothing but a paranoid weirdo. And I wasn't about to become that. So I started keeping notes, quietly. I jotted down every visit, every borrowed item, every odd hour. The dates, the times, the precise requests. I even made a spreadsheet on my laptop, color-coded by urgency and oddness. The entries looked ridiculous on the screen. October 3rd, 11:43 p.m. garden shears. October 8th, 2:17 a.m. jar of vinegar. October 10th, 3:05 a.m. flashlight. October 12th, 1:12 a.m. extension cord. October 15th, 4:47 a.m. box cutter. October 18th, 11:30 p.m. gas can. Each item was stranger than the last, and the times only got later and later. I tried to imagine what kind of person needed a gas can at midnight, or a box cutter at 4:47 a.m. It didn't add up. And the strangest thing, the more I noted, the more I realized they never really left their house. Not like normal people do, at least. No morning jogs, no grocery runs, no cars in the driveway except the van they arrived in, which never moved. The blinds were always drawn tight, but the dim amber glow inside suggested they were awake, watching. One night, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I waited until the street was quiet, then grabbed my flashlight and crossed the road. I rang the doorbell, heart pounding in my chest. Grace answered, eyes wide and startled. It was 11:37 p.m. "Hey," I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. "I was just wondering why you always borrow things at night. It's kind of unusual." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "We keep odd hours," she said softly. "Our work, it's unusual too." That was the closest thing to a real answer I'd gotten. I tried pressing, but she only smiled briefly and closed the door. That night, I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe they were just eccentric. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then I found it. I was walking past their house on my way to get the mail when something caught my eye. In the small patch of dirt next to their porch, buried under a scattering of dry leaves, was a crumpled piece of paper. I picked it up and unfolded it carefully. It was a map of my house. The front door, the windows, the back entrance, the garage. All meticulously drawn. But the part that made my blood run cold was the detailed notes scribbled in the margins, times, dates, descriptions. October 1st, lights out 10:30 p.m. October 5th, left kitchen window open 11:15 p.m. October 6th, neighbor's cat seen near back fence 9 p.m. October 7th, owner left garage door unlocked 10:45 p.m. And just below it, in neat handwriting, observation period ongoing. Target unaware. I shoved the paper into my jacket and bolted back home. Once inside, I locked every door and window. I called my best friend, Mark, and told him what I'd found. "Get cameras," he said immediately. "Motion sensors. Something." That night, I set up a cheap security camera in the living room, aimed at the front window. I didn't sleep. I watched the feed on my phone, heart in my throat. At 2:03 a.m., I saw a shadow move outside. A figure crouched near my porch light, fiddling with something. The face was obscured, but the build was familiar. Paul. The camera picked up a faint click, then the shadow slipped away. I ran outside, but no one was there. Only the autumn leaves swirling in the cold wind. For days after, I kept the camera running. Every night, the same pattern repeated. Someone lurking, watching, waiting. I realized then that the garden shears, the vinegar, the flashlight, they were all part of their plan. Each borrowed item was a tool for their surveillance. The box cutter for cutting wires. The gas can for what? I didn't know. But I was sure they were preparing for something. I couldn't just live like this. Trapped, watched, hunted. The worst part was the certainty that they had been watching me long before I even noticed them. Before the garden shears. Before the first knock. I thought back to the summer, the long evenings I'd spent on the porch. I never saw them then. How long had they been there, hiding in plain sight? How long had they been studying me, waiting for me to notice? I felt sick. But I also knew I had to be smart. I couldn't call the cops without proof. I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. So I started planning. I would gather evidence, piece together their movements, and figure out their endgame. because whatever it wasn't normal. It wasn't friendly. And if they wanted to watch me, then I was going to watch them right back. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I was a target, and I was ready to fight. The first thing I noticed that morning was that the garden shears were missing again. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe Paul or Grace had stopped by early, before I was awake, and borrowed them again. I didn't have a problem with that, except they never asked anymore. They just showed up on the porch or at the door, sometimes in the middle of the night, and took what they wanted. It was starting to feel less like neighborly borrowing and more like a weird intrusion. It was around 10 a.m. when I finally saw one of them. Paul was standing by his front window, looking directly at my house. His face was calm but unblinking, like he was rehearsing some conversation or memorizing details. I caught his eye for a moment, and he didn't look away. For a second, I thought I caught a flicker of recognition, as if he already knew who I was, what I did, my schedule. I shuffled inside and locked the door behind me. I spent the rest of the day pacing my living room, trying to make sense of their behavior. It was clear they were watching me. Not just casually, but with an intensity that was hard to shake. I looked out the window, scanning their house. Lights were off in most rooms, but a faint glow came from their basement window. It looked like they were home, but I never saw them leave. The garden was meticulously trimmed, the lawn manicured, but no footprints in the dirt. No trash bags ever went out to the curb. It was like the house was frozen in time, yet somehow alive. I started checking the neighborhood records online, just to see if Paul and Grace had any history. Nothing obvious came up, no arrests, no complaints, no previous addresses. Just a clean slate. That didn't ease my mind. Later that night, the doorbell rang again. It was nearly midnight. I looked through the peephole before answering. Grace was there, holding a cracked porcelain vase I'd never seen before. Her eyes were red-rimmed but steady. She didn't smile or say hello, just held the vase out in silent request. Reluctantly, I opened the door. "What do you need this for?" I asked. She hesitated and finally whispered, "It's from my grandmother's collection. I'm trying to restore it, but the glue I have isn't strong enough. I saw your super glue in the garage." I nodded and grabbed a tube, handing it over. She took it without a word and slipped back into the night. The porch light flickered off behind her. That was when the feeling really settled in. They were taking pieces of my life, my possessions, and I didn't know why. There was no friendly neighborhood exchange anymore. It was something else. Something calculated. The next day, I decided to do a little digging in person. I walked to their house, pretending to be casual, but my heart was pounding. The door was unlocked, which surprised me. The last time I had knocked, Grace had answered immediately and closed the door behind her. Now, the silence inside was thick. I stepped in. The house was dim except for the soft hum of a light in the basement. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I wandered through the room slowly, noticing things that felt off. In the living room, there were dozens of framed photographs lining the shelves. Not family portraits or vacation snapshots, but pictures of houses, streets, and people in the neighborhood. Some were blurry, some taken from angles that made me uncomfortable, like from behind blinds or over fences. I recognized a few faces, the mailman, the woman from 2 houses down, even my own reflection caught in a window pane. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. They weren't just watching me, they were watching everyone. I pushed open the door to the basement. It was cluttered with boxes, tools, and strange gadgets I didn't recognize. On a workbench, I found a collection of binoculars, cameras with long lenses, and maps marked with red pins. Some notes were scribbled in a neat, precise hand, times, dates, observations. My name appeared on a few pages, along with details about my daily routine, work schedule, and habits. I heard footsteps upstairs and froze. Whoever it was, they were moving quickly toward the basement. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, heart hammering. I thought about running but knew if I did, I'd leave everything behind. I needed to know why. The basement door creaked open slowly. A pair of shoes entered the room, followed by a low voice. "You shouldn't be here." It was Paul. His eyes locked on mine, not angry or scared, but something colder, a calculated interest. "You've been curious for a while." I swallowed hard. "Why are you watching me? What do you want?" Paul smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Protection. Sometimes you have to know the players before you can make your move." "Protection from what?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped back and motioned up the stairs. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." Against my better judgment, I followed him upstairs. In the front room, Grace was waiting with a thick binder. She handed it to me wordlessly. I opened it. Inside were pages and pages of detailed dossiers, information on every person on the street, their jobs, schedules, family members, financial records, even notes on their fears and weaknesses. This wasn't the work of nosy neighbors. This was surveillance, organized, systematic, and deeply invasive. "Why?" I asked, voice shaking. Grace's eyes were steady. "Because we're trying to stop something from happening here. Something you wouldn't believe." I closed the binder. "You've been watching me since before you moved in. All this time, I thought it was just the shears and the weird hours. But you've been watching everything, every part of my life." Paul nodded. "We had to be sure. You're important." The word felt like a punch to the gut. "Important? For what?" Before I could ask, they exchanged a glance, and Grace spoke. "We want you to join us. To help us." I stepped back, heart racing. "I don't even know what this is." Paul's expression darkened. "You will. Soon enough." The doorbell rang again, sharp and sudden. All three of us froze. I realized then that the house was no longer just their fortress, it was mine too, whether I wanted it or not. They'd been watching me long before I noticed them, and now I couldn't escape. I was trapped in their game, and the rules were still a mystery. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking that maybe they were just eccentric, or maybe the move had been rough on them. But I had this nagging feeling that something else was going on. They never left the house during the day. I never saw Paul or Grace out in the yard except for those late-night borrowings. No lawn care, no grocery runs, no walks. Just the house. Silent and still, except for the occasional flicker of their porch light. So the next day, I started paying attention. I stayed in my backyard, pretending to work on the fence, but really I was watching their house. I noted every detail I could. The windows stayed shut, but I saw shadows moving inside, Paul pacing the living room, Grace standing by the window as if waiting for something. No visitors came by. Not even once. If I wasn't careful, I would have said they were prisoners of their own making. I started writing down everything, the things they borrowed, the times they came over, the patterns I thought I saw. The flashlight was borrowed twice, once at 3 a.m., once at 5 a.m., both times for only an hour. The drill, the screwdriver set, the garden shears, the flashlight, a small folding ladder I kept in the shed. All taken and returned with no explanation, no thanks, just the door closing behind them. It wasn't until the fourth night that I noticed it. The curtains in their living room weren't drawn all the way. A small gap, just enough for someone to peek through. I caught a glimpse of a camera. It was sitting on the windowsill, aimed right at my house. My heart slammed into my ribs. I backed away from the fence and ducked behind the bushes. I didn't want to confront them, not yet. I had to figure out what they were after. The borrowed tools, the odd hours, their constant presence, it all felt like parts of a puzzle that didn't fit unless I saw the whole picture. I started rummaging through my own house, trying to find anything that might have been a target. I thought about the cameras I had around, the ones I'd installed after a break-in a couple of years back. I checked the footage from the backyard camera, just on a whim. There they were. Paul and Grace. But not just borrowing tools. They were hanging around my fence, sometimes just standing there, staring. Sometimes with the borrowed items in hand, like they were testing something. I watched as Paul held the drill and crouched by the fence line, as if trying to loosen the soil. Grace's hands fiddled with my garden shears, trimming something I couldn't see. I felt violated. My sanctuary was no longer mine. Then I noticed something worse. On the nights they came over, they didn't just borrow things, they were watching me. The footage showed them standing in the shadows, sometimes crouched in the bushes on their side of the street, eyes fixed on my porch, my windows, my every movement. I thought I was alone. I realized this wasn't about gardening supplies or tools. They were watching me long before I noticed them. The drill, the flashlight, the shears, they were excuses. Tools for something else. Something I hadn't figured out yet. That's when I decided to confront them. I waited until 10 p.m., a time I knew from my notes was usually quiet. I grabbed my phone and walked across the street to their front door. The porch light was on. I rang the bell. No answer. I rang again. Still nothing. I peered through the gap in the curtains. The house was dark except for the living room lamp, which was dim. I could see Grace sitting on the couch, her head down, her hands in her lap. Paul was nowhere in sight. I called out, "Hey, Grace." "Paul?" No response. I tried the handle. Unlocked. I stepped inside. The house smelled like dust and something else. Old wood, maybe, mixed with faint mildew. The air was thick, heavy. "Grace?" I said again. She looked up suddenly, startled. Her eyes were wide, and for a split second, I thought she might cry. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" I asked. She stood up slowly, hands trembling. "We didn't mean to scare you. We just needed help." I blinked. Help with what? Paul appeared behind her, his face unreadable. "We've been watching you because we're scared," he said quietly. "We're not who you think we are." It felt like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" Grace took a deep breath. "We're hiding. From someone. We can't leave the house, and we need things to fix the fence, the locks, the cameras." I stared at them, confusion mixing with fear. "Why didn't you tell me?" Paul looked down. "Because you're the only one we could trust. We needed to make sure you were safe." The more they spoke, the more I realized I was dealing with something far more complicated and dangerous than just odd neighbors wanting to borrow tools. Their paranoia wasn't just eccentricity. It was survival. I wanted to ask more, but the sound of a car pulling up outside made us all tense. Paul looked toward the window, clenched his fists. "They're here," he said, voice low. I felt the cold rise up my spine. Grace grabbed my arm. "Please. We need your help." And just like that, I was pulled into their nightmare, a silent witness to the darkness lurking behind those strange borrowings and midnight visits. The neighborhood wasn't the only thing hiding secrets. They were. And now so was I. Story 5, Erased Reality, Living Inside a Lie. When I first moved in with Mark, everything felt like a scene from a movie I'd only ever watched from the outside, careful, hopeful, and hesitant. Mark was charming in a way that made it easy to forget how little I really knew him. He had a smile that never seemed forced and a voice that settled over me like a warm blanket. He'd reached out after my last relationship ended abruptly, offering comfort and space, and I clung to the idea of starting fresh. When he suggested I move in, it felt natural, a step towards something better. The first few days passed in a blur of unpacking and arranging. I stacked my books on the shelves, placed my favorite mugs in the cabinet, and tried to carve out a corner of the living room that felt like mine. Mark was always nearby, moving between work calls and making coffee, the apartment filling with the soft sounds of his presence. I thought I was happy. But then, the little things started to change. It began with the notebooks. I've always kept journals, scribbling thoughts and memories to make sense of my days. The morning after our first week living together, I sat down with my coffee and reached for the blue notebook I'd been writing in the night before. The pages were different. Not entirely blank, but the entries I was certain I had written were gone, replaced by neat, looping handwriting I didn't recognize. The tone was strange, clinical even, talking about places I'd never been and conversations I never had. When I flipped back, the dates matched up to nights I remembered myself writing, but the content was alien. I showed it to Mark that evening, my voice cracking as I asked if he'd seen it. His face softened with concern. "Maybe you got mixed up with another notebook," he suggested gently, brushing a hand through my hair. "You've been stressed. It's okay to forget sometimes." I nodded, unnerved but willing to believe it was my mind playing tricks. The disappearing memories came next. At first, it was small things. A book I was sure I'd brought with me from my old apartment was nowhere to be found. The recipe I'd used for dinner the night before seemed unfamiliar when I tried to recall it. One afternoon, I remembered a conversation Mark and I had had the week prior about a weekend trip to the coast. When I brought it up, he looked puzzled, saying we'd never discussed such a thing. "Maybe you dreamed it," he said, voice steady and warm. I began to question everything. Was I losing my grip? The thought terrified me. I started keeping a voice recorder on me, narrating my day, jotting down what I could to anchor myself to reality. But even the recordings betrayed me. One morning, I played back a note from the previous night in which I recounted reading a chapter of a novel. The recording was there, but the words I'd spoken were muted and replaced by Mark's voice, calmly explaining the plot of a book I didn't recognize. I confronted him again, panic bubbling under my skin. Mark smiled, his eyes steady and kind, but there was something in his expression that made me pause, an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. He told me I needed to rest, that I was overwhelmed and that the stress was making my memory unreliable. "You're safe here," he said. "I'm here." But the apartment was no longer safe. The doors seemed heavier than before, the windows narrower. I found myself scanning the locks multiple times a day, double-checking that Mark wasn't hiding anything in the rooms I thought were my own. I started noticing small changes I couldn't explain, photos that showed only Mark where we'd taken pictures together, objects rearranged or missing. Once, I found a crumpled receipt from a store I'd never been to, dated a day when I was sure I'd been at work. At night, my dreams were shattered fragments of confusion, faces I didn't recognize, conversations that ended in silence, whispers of doubt echoing in empty halls. I tried to call my friends, desperate for an outside anchor. But Mark always answered first, his voice calm and persuasive, convincing me to hang up or try later. I stopped trusting my reflection. Sometimes it felt like the woman staring back at me was a stranger, her eyes glazed with exhaustion and fear. I kept the lights on, pacing the apartment, gripping the edges of the countertops as if they would ground me in some tangible truth. One evening, I went to the kitchen to find a note pinned to the fridge in Mark's handwriting. It read, "Remember, you're loved. You belong here." At first, it comforted me. Then I realized I had no memory of ever seeing it before, no memory of Mark writing it or leaving it there. I tore the note down, stuffing it into my pocket. That night, I slept with the door unlocked, my phone clutched in my hand. The worst part was the silence. Mark was there, always watching, but never explaining. Whenever I confronted him, his answers were smooth, rehearsed, and oddly detached. I began to suspect that everything I thought I knew about our relationship was a carefully constructed lie, and that the real truth was locked behind a door I couldn't open. I wanted to leave, but the city outside felt like a distant memory. The apartment had become a cage, the walls closing in with every passing day. The people I trusted had become shadows, and the memories I clung to slipped through my fingers like smoke. There was no one to turn to. No one who would believe me. And that was the beginning of the unraveling. I stared at the blue notebook on the table, hands trembling slightly as I opened it to the last page I remembered writing. I flipped back through the pages, scanning line after line. The entries I trusted, the raw, messy thoughts I poured out, were slowly overwritten by neat, clinical notes about places I'd never been, conversations I didn't remember, feelings I didn't feel. It was like someone had taken my journal and revised my past, turning it into a narrative that fit their version of reality. I slammed the notebook shut, breathing hard. Mark appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Everything okay?" he asked, his gaze soft, concerned. I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just tired, I guess." He nodded, stepping inside. "You've been working too hard. Maybe you should take a break." I wanted to ask him if he had touched my notebook, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I took the coffee and retreated to the couch, my mind racing. That afternoon, I tried to check the other journals I kept in the bedroom closet. 3 more notebooks, each a different color, each filled with months of thoughts, reminders, sketches. But every single one had the same problem. Pages that I was sure I'd written were altered. Memories rewritten. Dates shifted. Friends I'd met erased, replaced with unfamiliar names. All of it subtle enough that I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had happened, but glaring enough that I couldn't ignore. I began to doubt myself. Was I losing my memory? Was I falling apart? The idea terrified me more than anything. I reached for my phone to call my therapist, but the screen had no signal. Strange, I thought, since we lived in the city. I moved to the window and stared at other apartments, cars passing, people walking dogs, but my phone remained dead. Mark's phone, left charging on the kitchen counter, was fine. When I confronted him, he frowned, glancing toward my journals lying open on the table. "Are you sure you're not just stressed? Maybe you're imagining things." "No," I said, voice shaking. "I know what I wrote. This isn't me. Someone's changing my journals. Changing my memories." He gave me a long look, then softened. "Maybe you misplaced them. You've been overwhelmed. You should see a doctor." "I'm not crazy," I whispered. Mark shrugged, walked over, and put his hand on my shoulder. His touch was warm, reassuring, but I felt cold all over. Over the next few days, the subtle signs piled up. Photographs I recognized from my phone were missing, replaced by others I didn't remember taking. The calendar app had appointments I never scheduled, reminders to meet people I'd never heard of. Even the music playlists changed, filled with songs I didn't like. I started keeping a voice recorder on me, narrating everything I saw, felt, and remembered, hoping to capture evidence. But when I played the recordings back, some parts were missing, muffled, or overwritten with static. I tried to show Mark, but he dismissed it, saying, "Maybe your phone is malfunctioning." One night, I woke up to the sound of the front door locking. I sat up, heart pounding. Mark was asleep beside me, breathing evenly. I crept to the living room and saw the lock click into place. I tried the door, it was stuck. I pulled hard, but it didn't budge. I pounded on Mark's door. "Mark, the door won't open." He opened it, rubbing his eyes. "It's probably just jammed. I'll fix it in the morning." But I didn't sleep. I sat by the door, staring at the lock, feeling trapped. The house, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage. The next morning, I found a note taped to the fridge. "Don't worry. I'm looking out for you." No signature. No explanation. My mind faltered. Was this a joke? A threat? Was Mark involved? I checked the locks again. Windows bolted from the inside. The back door chained. I was alone. The worst moment came when I tried to call my best friend, Emma. The number I was sure I'd saved came up disconnected. I searched for other contacts, but many names were gone. My phone was an alien device. I searched the apartment for a landline but found none. I was cut off. I confronted Mark again that evening, desperate. Why can't I contact anyone? Why are my memories being changed? What's happening to me? He looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. "You're scared. It's the anxiety. You've been through a lot. I'm here. Trust me." But his eyes betrayed something else, a calculated coldness I hadn't noticed before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, notebook open, recording device in hand. I tried to anchor myself to reality by listing memories I knew were true. But even those felt fragile, fleeting. The house had become a trap not just physically but mentally. Every confirmation I sought dissolved into doubt. By the end of the week, I stopped trusting my own mind. I stopped trusting Mark. And in that silence, isolation wrapped around me tighter than any lock. Shadows shifted at the edge of my vision, whispering questions I dared not answer. The walls seemed to breathe, closing in with each heartbeat. I realized then that the only escape was to confront the darkness within myself before it consumed what little remained. The morning light crept through the thin curtains, casting pale stripes across the floor. I looked around the bedroom. The side table was empty, the place where I'd left the notebook just last night. I checked the living room, the kitchen, even the trash bin. I couldn't find it anywhere. It was as if the notebook had vanished. I wanted to scream, but all I did was sink onto the floor, my back against the bedpost. How could something this simple become a source of such anxiety? The last few weeks had blurred into a constant haze of confusion and doubt. I'd started questioning everything I thought I knew about myself, about Mark, about the life we were building here. The worst part was realizing how much I was depending on those pages to keep my memories intact. Without them, I was adrift. Mark emerged from the bathroom, his hair still damp, and smiled when he saw me on the floor. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, crouching down beside me. "I can't find my notebook," I said, voice trembling. "The blue one. I had it yesterday, I'm sure of it." He frowned, searching my face. "Maybe you left it at work? Or in the car?" "No. I always bring it inside." I swallowed hard. "I don't know what's happening to me, Mark. It's like things I remember aren't real, or maybe I'm making it all up." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. You're not making anything up. You're just tired. Stress can mess with your memory. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about stress or exhaustion. It felt deliberate, like someone was erasing pieces of me, rewriting my story without my consent. The days that followed only deepened the suffocating fog. I began noticing small discrepancies, things that should have been familiar but weren't. Mark would mention conversations we'd never had, plans I didn't remember making. Items in the apartment would be rearranged or replaced without explanation. I found unfamiliar receipts in my purse and emails in my inbox from people I didn't know. One evening, I confronted Mark while he was washing dishes. "Who's Derek?" I asked, holding up a folded note I'd found tucked between the mail. Mark's face tightened for a fraction of a second before his usual calm returned. "Derek? Just a friend from college. I told you about him." "No, you didn't," I said, feeling a cold pit open in my stomach. "I don't remember you mentioning him." He set the sponge down and wiped his hands. "Maybe it slipped your mind. You've been really stressed lately." I stared at him, searching for any sign of deception, but his expression was unreadable. It wasn't just the missing memories anymore. It was the way he manipulated them, controlling what I could recall and what I couldn't. That night, I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to piece together fragments of my own life. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old text messages, looking for clues. Conversations with friends, family, even myself. But the threads were frayed, incomplete, and sometimes strangely altered. In one message to my sister, I'd written about a weekend trip Mark and I took to the coast. But I had no memory of such a trip. When I asked Mark the next morning, he smiled and reminded me of the photos he'd taken. I asked to see the photos. "They're on my phone," he said, casual as ever. "I can show you later." Later never came. I felt trapped in a labyrinth of half-truths and shifting realities. The apartment, once a sanctuary, became a cage. The walls seemed to close in, the silence thick and oppressive. I stopped inviting friends over, who would believe me if I told them my memories were slipping away. That my partner, the person I trusted most, was the source of the distortion? In a rare moment when Mark was away, I searched the apartment from top to bottom. I opened drawers, rifled through cabinets, and checked every nook for that damned notebook or any other clue. Behind a loose panel in the hallway closet, I found a small, unmarked box. Inside were several USB drives, labeled in handwriting that looked eerily familiar, my handwriting. With trembling fingers, I plugged the first USB into my laptop. The files were folders filled with detailed logs, entries titled with dates and times, notes about what I said, what I did, even the books I'd read and the meals I'd eaten. It was like someone had been meticulously tracking me. I felt sick. The realization settled over me. Mark wasn't just erasing memories, he was rewriting them, shaping my reality to fit some twisted narrative. I thought back to every time he'd corrected me gently when I misremembered something, every time he'd smiled and told me I was imagining things. It wasn't paranoia. It was control. I knew I had to act, but I was isolated. I had no proof I could show anyone without sounding crazy. And I couldn't leave, not without my things, without the life I was supposed to be building here. I started keeping a new journal, this time hidden under the floorboard in the bedroom. I recorded everything I noticed, every inconsistency, every moment of doubt. It was my lifeline, my anchor to reality. But even that felt fragile. One morning, I woke to find the journal gone. In its place was a note, written on a slip of paper in the same handwriting, "You're safe here. Trust me." I folded the note slowly, my hands shaking. Safe. Trust. words that felt like chains tightening around my wrists. The house was no longer a home. It was a trap, one built not with locks or bars, but with lies and manipulation. And I was the prisoner, losing myself one memory at a time. I didn't know how much longer I could keep holding on before the darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up with the taste of metal in my mouth and a pounding headache that throbbed behind my eyes like a warning bell. The couch had indentations, like someone had been sitting there recently, but I was alone. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table, next to a crumpled post-it note with words I didn't recognize. It read, "Don't forget the 8 p.m. call." My handwriting, but I had no memory of writing it or what call it referred to. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and got up, my legs shaky. Mark's side of the bed was made neatly, the sheets tucked in perfectly, but my side was untouched. Nothing in the room suggested I'd slept there. I reached for my phone, but it was nowhere to be found. Strange, Mark usually kept his gadgets on the nightstand, and I kept mine in my purse. I checked the usual places, the kitchen counter, the living room, the bathroom. Nothing. As I wandered into the kitchen, I noticed the calendar on the fridge had changed. Dates were crossed out, but so many I was certain I'd marked last week were now blank. I pointed to today's date, but the day of the week didn't match what I remembered. My chest tightened. How had I forgotten what day it was? I dialed Mark's number on the landline, but it rang through to voicemail. When Mark came home later that evening, his smile was as smooth as ever, but I caught the faintest flicker in his eyes, as if he'd been waiting for me to ask questions I couldn't yet form. I tried to sound casual when I said, "Hey, have you seen my phone?" He shook his head. "No idea." "Did you check the car?" "Maybe you left it there after work." Yeah, maybe," I said, but I wasn't convinced. I noticed the faint scent of his cologne, but it was mingled with something else, something sterile and chemical, like cleaning supplies or something stronger. Over dinner, I tried to bring up the calendar, but Mark brushed it off. "You've been stressed. Maybe you're just losing track of days. It happens." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You need to relax." But I couldn't relax. That night, the feeling of being watched gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep in the bedroom, so I curled up on the couch with one eye in the hallway. The house seemed too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. The next morning, I woke to an unfamiliar sound, the whir of a vacuum from the room adjacent to ours. I peeked around the corner and saw Mark meticulously cleaning the study, moving methodically like he was erasing footprints in the snow. On his desk lay a small box, the kind used for storing documents or photos. It was locked. "I didn't know you liked to clean in the mornings," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Mark smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just making sure everything's perfect. You know, for us." I nodded, but my unease only deepened. When I returned to the living room, my heart hit my throat. My blue notebook, the one I'd been writing in every day since moving in, was gone. I rifled through the shelves, the drawers, even the trash bin. Nothing. I sat down, trying to remember what I'd written last. But my mind was a fog. Memories that had felt solid yesterday now slipped through my fingers like smoke. A dinner with friends that I was sure had happened last week, no one I called remembered. Conversations with Mark that felt vivid, he denied they ever took place. On the fourth day, I found a new journal on the kitchen table. It wasn't mine. The cover was plain black leather, and inside the pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting. I flipped through it until I found entries dated the same days as my lost memories, but the words twisted familiar events into distorted versions. One entry described a fight between Mark and me that I couldn't recall. Another mentioned plans we supposedly made for the weekend, but when I asked Mark, he looked at me like I was crazy. You don't remember? We talked about it. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. I shook my head, the room spinning. No, I don't. That night, I heard the lock click on the front door late after I'd gone to bed. I stayed frozen, listening to footsteps pacing the hallway, the persistent rustling of paper or plastic. The next morning, my reflection caught my eye in the bathroom mirror. There was a bruise on my jaw I didn't remember getting. When I asked Mark about it, he said I must have bumped into something, but his eyes lingered too long on my face, scanning it like he was searching for proof of my confusion. I began to isolate myself, retreating into the corners of the house, avoiding Mark's gaze. I stopped writing in my journal since anything I wrote disappeared or was contradicted the next day. I tried to reach out to friends, but their responses were distant, distracted, or sometimes confused. The world I'd known was slipping away. One afternoon, while searching the house, I stumbled upon a small room I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked behind the laundry room, a storage closet maybe? The door was slightly ajar, and inside, I found a collection of files pinned to the wall, photographs, and notes. Among the photographs were pictures of me taken without my knowledge, captured in various rooms of the house, in moments I didn't realize I was being watched. Pinned beside the photos was a calendar with days marked off and notes in the same neat handwriting from the mysterious journal. The notes referenced adjustments and corrections to my behavior and memories. My hands trembled as I scanned the room. There were audio recorders, small cameras hidden behind vents, and a laptop open to a document that detailed plans to manipulate my perception of reality. I backed away slowly, the walls closing in. I realized I was trapped, not by locks or bars, but by the systematic dismantling of my mind and trust. Mark wasn't the charming partner I thought he was. He was a captor, using psychological control to rewrite my sense of self. I wanted to scream, to run, but the house seemed to absorb my fear and silence it. I was alone, a prisoner in a home that felt more like a cage each day. That night, I lay awake, the ceiling above me a cruel reminder of my fragmented mind. I couldn't trust my memories, my senses, or the man I'd once believed loved me. The only truth I had left was this terrifying awareness. I was losing myself, piece by piece, and no one was coming to save me. I woke up to the sound of the front door closing softly, the kind of noise that usually meant Mark was leaving for work early. For a moment, I felt relief. He was gone, and the house was mine, even if just for a few hours. But then the unease crept back in. Why hadn't he said goodbye? Usually, Mark kissed me on the forehead or murmured something small but present. Today, nothing. I got out of bed, wrapped a robe around me, and walked to the living room. The apartment was unnervingly quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I noticed a faint smell of coffee in the air, but the pot was empty. Mark must have made it before leaving. I reached for my phone to check the time and the messages, but the screen was black. I pressed the power button again. No response. I tried the charger, but nothing happened. The phone was dead, and I was cut off. I felt that familiar pinch of panic. Being without my phone in this apartment, in this moment, felt like losing a lifeline. I didn't have a landline, no one else's number memorized, and Mark was gone. I was alone. In an effort to distract myself, I moved to the kitchen. The countertops were spotless except for one thing, a small, folded note, taped to the fridge with a magnet I hadn't seen before. The handwriting was neat, almost too perfect, but unmistakably Mark's. It read, "Don't forget to check the attic. It's important." I frowned. The attic? We'd never talked about the attic. I hadn't even been up there. It was a narrow staircase behind the kitchen pantry, hidden by a door I'd only seen Mark open once. A chill ran down my spine. Something about that note didn't sit right, but curiosity, mixed with a gnawing desire to understand what was happening to me, pushed me toward the door. The attic was dark and dusty. I flipped on the light switch, but the bulb flickered weakly. The space was cramped, filled with boxes and old furniture wrapped in yellowing sheets. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me. A quick glance revealed nothing out of the ordinary until I spotted a small, locked box sitting on top of an old trunk. I didn't recognize it. I knelt down and examined the lock. It was a simple padlock, not very secure. I pulled out my hairpin from my robe pocket and fiddled with the mechanism. After a few tense seconds, it clicked open. Inside the box, I found a collection of photographs, some documents, and several USB drives. The photos were especially unsettling, marked in various settings I didn't recognize, sometimes with other men, sometimes alone, always looking serious, as if deep in thought or under pressure. One photo showed him shaking hands with a man I assumed was a lawyer or agent, judging by the suits and the office backdrop. I felt a sudden wave of nausea. Who was Mark, really? What was he hiding? I pulled out one of the USB drives and hurried back downstairs to my laptop. Plugging it in, I found a folder labeled Research. Inside were files about memory manipulation, cognitive behavioral therapy, and several scientific papers on experimental amnesia. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Was this why I couldn't remember certain things? Why my own memories about my past few weeks felt fragmented, as if edited? My phone buzzed suddenly, making me jump. The screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. You're almost there. Don't stop now. I dropped the phone back on the table, my hands trembling. I didn't know what almost there meant, or who was sending these messages. More importantly, how had they gotten my number? I forced myself to think logically. If Mark had access to these drives and this kind of research, was he conducting some experiment on me? Was he rewriting my memories as some kind of control? The idea was too absurd to fully accept, but the evidence was piling up. I tried calling my best friend, Kate, but the call wouldn't connect. I left a voicemail, voice shaking, asking her to come over. Minutes passed like hours. I paced the living room, eyes darting to every corner, feeling like the walls were closing in. Then Mark walked in, as if nothing was wrong. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and asked if I'd had coffee. "Mark," I said, voice low and steady despite the chaos inside, "what's going on? What are those files in the attic?" His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before settling back into place. "You found that, huh? Look, I was going to tell you, but I wasn't sure you were ready." "Ready for what? Why are you doing all this? Why are my memories changing?" He stepped closer, eyes intense but calm. "I'm trying to help you. You've been through a lot, things you don't even realize. I'm helping you forget the worst parts." "By erasing everything?" I whispered. He shook his head. "Not erasing. Rewriting. Reshaping. To give you peace." The room spun. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but the words caught in my throat. "I don't want peace at the cost of who I am," I said finally. Mark reached for my hand, but I pulled away, backing toward the door. "Please," he said. "Let me explain." I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed my coat and keys, determined to leave, to find help, to find myself before I disappeared completely. But as I reached the hallway, the door was locked. I was trapped. And for the first time since moving in, the charming, safe man I thought I knew was the one I feared most. Story 6, Silent Pursuer, Stalking the Midnight Platform. The night had dragged on longer than I'd expected, the office empty except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional tap of my fingers on the keyboard. It was the kind of night where the city felt hollow, stripped of its usual pulse, like it was holding its breath. The platform was practically empty, save for a few scattered shadows under the flickering fluorescent lights. I didn't mind. I'd been working late all week, and the quiet was a relief after the constant noise of the office. I checked my watch as I stepped onto the platform. Midnight, exactly. The next train wasn't due for another 10 minutes, which meant I had to wait. I settled near the edge, close enough to see the tracks but far enough back to feel safe. The platform was cold, the chill seeping through my jacket and sinking into my bones. At first, I focused on the familiar rhythm of the subway station, the distant screech of trains, the occasional announcement crackling through the speakers, the soft echo of footsteps on concrete. I let my mind drift, trying to shake off the tensions of the day. Then I noticed him. A man, standing a few yards behind me near the edge of the platform, his figure outlined by the dim glow of the overhead lights. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just standing still, his hands in his coat pockets. But something unsettled me. It wasn't his presence, exactly, it was the way he was watching me. When I turned to glance back, he was always there, just out of clear sight, his expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was tired, bored, or something else entirely. What unnerved me most was his stillness, silent, unblinking, like a statue carved from shadow. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Maybe he was waiting for a train too, or maybe he was just passing through the station. But every time I looked away and then back, he was closer. The first time I noticed it, I was checking my phone. When I looked up, the man was roughly 15 feet behind me. The next time, about 10 minutes later, I caught a glimpse of him only a few feet farther down the platform, his posture unchanged but somehow more deliberate. Each glance revealed him inching closer, never hurried, never breaking his rigid stance. My pulse quickened. I considered moving to another spot, but the platform was mostly empty. It felt like he was tracking me, careful not to be obvious but too consistent to be coincidence. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe he was just nervous, waiting for the last train like me. But the silence between us was thickening, dense enough to choke. I scanned the platform for other people. There was no one else in sight, the entry gates were shut behind me, and no trains were coming soon. The station was deserted except for him. My skin crawled despite the cold. I glanced again, suddenly aware of every sound, the distant rumble of a train in the tunnels, the flicker of lights overhead, the faint rustle of the man's coat as he shifted his weight. He was closer now, maybe only 10 feet away. I shifted forward, edging toward an empty bench near a pillar. Still, he followed, his silent steps measured and deliberate. No sudden moves, no hurried pace, just a slow, inexorable drift toward me. I felt trapped. The platform stretched into darkness at both ends, the walls closing in with every quiet movement. I wanted to call for help, but my phone's screen remained stubbornly black, the battery dead. Panic rose in my chest, but I forced my breathing to stay steady. I needed to think. Another glance. He wasn't smiling. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking and cold. There was no warmth there, no recognition or friendliness, only a chilling, neutral focus that made me feel like prey. The train announcement buzzed overhead, but it was muffled, distorted. I realized I wasn't really hearing it. I was only registering the vibration in the platform as the train approached on the opposite track, far from where I stood. The man took another step closer. I debated running, but where? The station was a dead end behind me, the long platform stretched out ahead. I didn't want to show fear, but I couldn't shake it either. I moved again, toward the stairway leading up to the street. His pace matched mine, like a shadow tethered to my movements. My heart hammered in my ears, loud and desperate. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the man stopped a few feet back. He didn't follow me up. I didn't wait to see if he stayed. I bolted up the stairs, bursting through the exit and into the empty street. The city was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I didn't look back until I was several blocks away. The man was nowhere in sight. For the first time all night, I let myself breathe. But I knew I wasn't safe, not really. Whoever he was, and whatever he wanted, he'd shown me just enough to know I was his focus. And that was the part that scared me the most. I quickened my pace, heart pounding, scanning every corner for signs of movement. The silence felt heavy, like the city was holding its breath alongside me. Somewhere deep down, I knew the night was far from over, and my next move would have to be smarter, faster. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. I tried to focus on anything else. My phone, for one. But the screen was dead. I'd forgotten to charge it after a long day at work. With no distractions, my eyes kept drifting back to him. There was something off about the way he stood, his body rigid, like a statue carved from stone. No one looked at him, no one acknowledged him, but neither did he move away. Just lingered. The platform was so deserted that his presence was impossible to ignore. It felt deliberate. Or maybe I was just paranoid. I couldn't decide which frightened me more. I shifted my weight, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe he's waiting for the same train, I thought, hoping to rationalize the creeping dread tightening my chest. But even as that thought crossed my mind, I realized how foolish it sounded. People didn't usually pace around a platform at this hour, especially not circling someone else in silence. I glanced down the length of the platform. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting long shadows that stretched and flickered like ghosts but were only the warped outlines of structural beams and benches. I tried to count the seconds between flickers but gave up. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, a steady thump that drowned out the usual hum of the station. Again, when I looked back, he was closer. Closer than a few moments before. I had no idea how or when he'd moved, but the distance between us had shrunk. Now he was maybe 10 feet behind me, a proximity that made it impossible to ignore the faint scent of stale tobacco and something acrid, like sweat mixed with cheap cologne. I swallowed hard. Maybe I could find a way to break the tension, start a conversation even, to dispel this silent menace. But I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing I was scared. Just a guy, I told myself. Nothing more. The train was still nowhere in sight. The platform felt like a trap. I considered leaving, finding a well-lit coffee shop nearby, or walking the few blocks to the next station. But the clock told me the train was too soon. If I left now, I'd be stuck outside in the cold, vulnerable in a place I didn't know well. The station was empty enough that no one else was around to help if something went wrong. When I turned again, he was now almost directly behind me. Too close. I could make out the lines of his face in the dim light, his jaw strong, his expression unreadable. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but his fingers twitched slightly, like he was testing his grip on something invisible. I fought the sudden urge to run. My legs felt heavy, like they'd forgotten how to move. My breath came out in shallow bursts, clouds of vapor dissipating into the cold air. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but the silence swallowed my voice before it could form. The platform clock ticked quietly, each second dragging longer than the last. Then, faintly, the rumble of a train echoed from down the line. Relief surged through me, but it was tempered by the fact that the man didn't move. He didn't step onto the tracks or step back. He just stood there, as unmoving and silent as before. The The train's headlights appeared in the tunnel, glimmering like a distant star moving steadily towards us. I took a tiny step forward, wanting to put the platform between us. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. Then I heard it, a soft, barely perceptible sound behind me. A scrape against the concrete, slow and deliberate. The man shifted his weight, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic in his hand. A knife? My mind reeled. Could it be? Was I really in danger? I turned sharply, forcing myself to make eye contact. "Hey," I said, voice firmer than I felt. "Why are you following me?" He didn't answer. His lips didn't move. He just stared, eyes wide and unblinking. Then, slowly, he raised his hand, holding the blade up so that it caught the light, a glint sharp enough to cut through the night. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the platform. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet betrayed me, frozen in place by a cold surge of panic. The train was almost here, the brakes screeching as it slowed to a stop. The man took a step forward. Another. Closer. I backed away, heart hammering, looking for an escape. But the platform was narrow, the tracks on one side, the wall on the other. I was trapped. Suddenly, the train doors hissed open, flooding the platform with harsh artificial light. People inside glanced up at the commotion but quickly looked away, immersed in their phones or conversations. No one noticed the drama unfolding just outside. Without thinking, I bolted towards the open doors, the man's footsteps pounding behind me. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut just as he reached the edge of the platform. The lights in the train car were bright and sterile, the hum of the engine filling my ears. I pressed myself against the opposite wall, gasping for air, glancing nervously through the windows. The man stood on the platform, staring at the closed doors with a blank expression. The train jerked forward, pulling away from the station. The man's figure shrank in the distance, swallowed by the dark night and the flickering platform lights. I collapsed into a seat, hands trembling. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket, an alert. I pulled it out, surprised to see the screen lit up. A quick glance told me it was a text from my colleague, asking if I'd made it home okay. I typed back shakily, fingers trembling, almost. Had a close call. Will explain tomorrow. Even as the train sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The man hadn't just been waiting for the train. He'd been waiting for me. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, a cold realization settled in. He knew where I got off next. I kept telling myself to stay calm. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was waiting for the same train, maybe he was just pacing. But the pattern was too deliberate. Every time I looked away, he circled behind me, closer, closer. The platform was deserted except for us, and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead felt deafening. I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I glanced down the tracks, trying to focus on the faint gleam of lights signaling the incoming train, but the man's figure hovered just at the edge of my vision. I turned again, slower this time, trying not to seem nervous, but when I met his gaze, it was like looking into a void. His face was nondescript, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back and a stubble that caught the harsh station light, but the expression was unreadable, empty and unblinking. The platform clock ticked. 5 more minutes. I shifted my weight, wrapping my hands tightly around my bag strap. My mind raced. Should I move? Should I call someone? I didn't even know if my phone had signal in the station's underground pockets. I pulled it out anyway and checked. No bars. Perfect. The man took a step closer, and my breath hitched. I looked down the platform again, past the curve where the train would appear. Maybe if I just stayed still, he'd lose interest. But no, when I looked back, he was a foot away, too close. I felt a trickle of sweat run down my temple, despite the chill. My legs wanted to run, but I told myself sitting tight was safer. I could see any other people around, and calling attention to myself might provoke him. I tried to remember everything I'd learned about dealing with strangers who lurk. Avoid eye contact, don't show fear, make a call if you can. But I had no coverage, and I was locked in with this man who seemed to be waiting for me to make a move. Suddenly, he spoke, not a loud shout, just a low, calm voice that cut through the silence. "Hey!" My throat went dry. I didn't respond. "Didn't mean to bother you," he said, stepping even closer, his voice eerily steady. You look like you could use some company. Quiet nights like this can get lonely." I stared at him, trying to keep my face neutral. His eyes never wavered from mine. "I'm waiting for the last train," I said finally, voice shaking just a little. "It'll be here soon." He nodded slowly, then shifted his weight. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "You work late?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Long week." He smiled then, not wide, but enough to show teeth. Something about it didn't reach his eyes. It felt rehearsed, like a mask he put on. "Me too," he said. "Keeps me busy." He glanced around, as if curious about the empty platform, then back at me. "You're not worried?" "It's pretty late to be alone." I swallowed. "I'll be fine." He nodded, but didn't move away. Instead, he took another step closer, until I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight scar on his left cheek, the way his fingers instinctively curled around the strap of his own bag. My mind shouted at me to move, but my body was frozen. Everything about him screamed danger, not just the way he was here, stalking me quietly, but the way his voice was so calm, so steady, like he'd done this before. A distant rumble echoed through the tunnel. The train. I didn't wait for it to get closer. I pushed myself up, grabbed my bag, and stepped away from the edge, moving briskly toward the stairs. The man matched my pace without hesitation, not breaking eye contact. My heart slammed in my chest. I could hear my breath coming fast, sharp like a cornered animal, but I didn't dare look back again. When I reached the stairwell, I glanced down at the steps and saw his shadow stretching behind me. He didn't stop. I reached the top, bursting out into the cold night air, thankful for the noisy street lamps and the distant cars. I spun around, ready to sprint, but the man was nowhere in sight. The platform was empty, silent again. I pressed my back against the grimy brick wall of the station entrance, gasping for air. The city noise filled my ears, the honks, the murmurs, the hum of life that had been absent underground. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from my roommate. "Are you home yet?" "You're late." I didn't answer. I couldn't stop thinking about the man and how he had followed me without a word, how close he'd gotten, and how unblinking his eyes were. I took a deep breath and started walking toward the busier street. My steps were quick but measured. I wasn't going to look back. Not again. But the feeling stayed with me, the weight of someone watching, someone willing to move silently in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Later, when I finally got home, I locked every door twice and checked every window before I let myself breathe. The city outside was alive and full of people, but inside, the silence felt heavier than ever. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, and every time I opened them, I wondered if he was still out there, circling. The dawn brought no relief, only the lingering unease that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done yet. I told myself I was imagining things. It had started so subtly. One glance back, and he was maybe 20 feet behind me, leaning against a pillar with his head tilted slightly, watching. Then 20 minutes later, every time I looked, he was closer. 15 feet, then 10, then 7. The first few times, I convinced myself it was coincidence, or maybe someone else waiting for the same train. But there was no one else on the platform, not really. Just him. I was trapped in that cycle. Look away, wait a beat, look back, and find him closer, always closer, never blinking, never speaking. His eyes were dark and unblinking, fixed like a predator's gaze. His expression was unreadable, a blank mask that made my skin crawl. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breathing, careful not to show any sign of fear. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag, nails digging into the leather. I debated moving, but the platform was long and empty, and moving forward just meant walking toward the other end where no one was waiting either. Turning around was out of the question. I couldn't face him directly. And stepping onto the tracks was obviously dangerous. The cold night air felt heavy, pressing in like a physical weight. I tried to focus on the sounds around me. The distant rumble of a train, the faint drip of water somewhere in the tunnels, the low hum of the overhead lights struggling to maintain their glow. But everything felt distorted, every noise amplified or warped by the tension knotting inside me. Then I noticed something else, his hands. They were tucked inside his coat pockets, but the coat was too thin for winter. I realized he wasn't just standing there idly, he was circling the platform in the shadows, always behind me, always closing distance when I looked away. It was deliberate. I felt it in my gut. I glanced around for a way out. The ticket booth was empty and darkened, the glass smudged with years of neglect. The stairs leading up to the street were at the far end, a good 100 feet away. My phone was in my pocket, but service was spotty underground, and the battery was low from the day's use. I pulled it out anyway, thumb hovering over the screen. No signal. Great. I tried again, then again, heart pounding every time the no service message popped up. My throat tightened. I wasn't sure whether to run or stay frozen like a statue, but the longer I waited, the closer he got. I considered yelling for help, though I knew no one would hear me. The station was dead silent except for the hum of the lights and the occasional metallic groan of the tracks. Nobody else was around. I was alone with this man, this silent watcher who had made me his focus. I shifted my weight, trying to make myself less of a target. I edged toward the stairwell as casually as I could, keeping my eyes on him out of the corner of my vision. His face remained expressionless, eyes locked on me like a laser. Each step felt like it echoed in the cavernous station. When I was about halfway to the stairs, he moved again. Not forward, but to the side, closing the distance laterally, cutting off my escape path. Panic surged, sharp and immediate. I froze. There was nowhere to go. The platform was a long rectangle of concrete and steel, and he was blocking my way. I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried to force my voice out, shaky but loud enough. What do you want? Silence. No reply. Just the unblinking gaze that made my heart hammer against my ribs like a drum. Then he stepped closer. His movements were slow and deliberate, the kind you see in movies, calculated and chilling. I could see the sharp angle of his jaw, the faint stubble on his chin, the thin line of his lips pressed tight. The air between us felt charged, tense enough to crack. I tried to back up, but my heel caught on a stray bit of debris, and I stumbled. My bag shifted, the strap biting into my shoulder. He moved again, closing in, and I felt for my phone, praying for some kind of miracle. Finally, a low voice, barely above a whisper, broke the silence. You shouldn't have noticed. My breath caught. The words were soft but filled with menace. I took a step back, then another, my back nearly touching the cold steel wall of the platform. My heart was racing so fast it felt like I could hear it thundering in my ears. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, voice trembling. "I don't know what you mean." He leaned in closer. "Most people don't look back. Most people don't see." Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My mind scrambled for options, but fear had gripped me like a vice. I was trapped, exposed, and utterly alone. Then, unexpectedly, the distant rumble of the train grew louder. The harsh screech of metal on rails echoed through the tunnel. The man's head snapped toward the sound, and for a fraction of a second, his mask slipped. I saw a flicker of frustration, maybe even anger. I seized the moment. With whatever courage I could muster, I spun around and bolted toward the stairs. My footsteps pounded on the concrete as the train thundered closer. I didn't look back until I reached the top, the blast of cold night air hitting my face like a slap. Outside, the city was dark and quiet, but alive. People passed by on the distant sidewalk, oblivious to what had just transpired underground. I didn't stop running until I had crossed 3 streets, my breath ragged and chest burning. Only then did I dare to look at my phone. Service had returned. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, my voice barely coherent as I reported the man on the platform, the way he had circled me, silent and unblinking. When the police arrived, they told me the station was usually empty this late, that there had been reports before of loiterers, people following others, but never anything serious. They took my statement and assured me they'd increase patrols. But none of that mattered to me. The image of that man, the way he moved, the cold intensity behind his eyes, haunted me long after I got home. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, still waiting, just beneath the surface of the city's steel and stone. And I knew, deep down, that next time I might not be so lucky. I kept my gaze fixed on the darkened tracks, the gravel between the rails faintly visible under the dim platform lights, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, somewhere behind me. It was past 12:30 now, and the platform had emptied almost entirely. The occasional traveler had disappeared in earlier trains, leaving me to wait alone under the buzzing fluorescence that hummed like an anxious heartbeat. The air was cold, but my skin had started to itch with sweat. My heart hammered against my ribs in a slow, irregular rhythm, and I fought to breathe evenly. I told myself it was just paranoia, that maybe he was waiting for the same train, or maybe he was some night worker taking breaks between shifts. But every instinct warned me otherwise. At last, I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was there. Closer than before. Standing a few feet behind me, just past the yellow safety line, his dark coat blending into the shadowed corners of the platform. His eyes were fixed on me. Not blinking. Not moving. I swallowed hard and looked back at the tracks, pretending not to notice. Something about that blank, unblinking stare made it impossible to return my own gaze. My phone was tucked away in my pocket, the screen dark. I didn't want to be the one to start something by pulling it out. I shifted my weight slightly, testing the space between us. He didn't move. My mind raced, flipping over what I knew about personal safety and what I should do next. Should I move? Should I call someone? Should I try to confront him? None of those seemed like an obvious choice, and I hated how frozen I felt. The lights flickered again, and I caught sight of his face in a brief flash, a pale face, sharp features, eyes that seemed too wide and too still for comfort. No expression, no sign of recognition, just pure, unsettling focus. The platform was completely deserted now, save for us two. I could hear the faint echo of my own breathing, heavy and uneven. I checked the time. 12:35. The next train was due in 5 minutes. 5 minutes of being trapped here with a man who had been silently stalking me in circles, getting closer each time. I took a careful step forward, closer to the exit stairs leading up to the street. The man mirrored me, stepping forward too. I stopped and turned slightly, trying to keep him in my peripheral vision. He didn't speak. I debated calling 911, but I knew the police response time would be slow at this hour in this part of town. And if he was watching my every move, he might notice the phone in my hand before I could get the call out. I tried to catch the attention of the station attendant through the glass walls of the booth down the platform. They were gone. No one was left. My phone vibrated suddenly in my pocket, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I pulled it out, heart pounding, and saw a text from my sister. "You still coming home?" "It's late." I typed back quickly, waiting for the train. "Might be delayed." I looked back up, and he was only a few feet behind me now. Too close. Panic surged through me, fierce and sharp. I moved faster toward the stairwell, the echo of my footsteps loud in the empty station. He followed. I sprinted up the stairs 2 at a time, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead in a staccato rhythm. Behind me, I heard his footsteps, deliberate, calm, unhurried. Not chasing me, just following. At the top of the stairs, I burst out onto the empty street. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I glanced back. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me as if nothing had happened. Then he turned and disappeared into the shadows of the street, swallowed by the night. I didn't wait for another train. Instead, I pulled my phone out again and dialed my sister's number. "Hey," I said breathlessly when she answered. "Can you pick me up? I don't think it's safe here." There was a pause on the other end. "Of course. Where are you?" I gave her the address and hung up, still looking over my shoulder, heart hammering in my chest. I stayed put under the dim street lamp until she arrived, parking her car at the corner in a rush of headlights and warmth. I slid into the passenger seat and locked the door behind me without a word. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past the windows, but I kept my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching the deserted streets behind us. The man had vanished, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like a shadow. I wondered who he was, what he wanted, and whether I'd ever see him again. The silence between us was thick, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sigh from the heater. She glanced over, her eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and something else, fear, maybe, or uncertainty. I wanted to ask her if she felt it too, that prickling sense of unease settling deep in my bones, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I stared ahead, willing the streetlights to stretch longer, to carry us safely away from whatever had followed me tonight. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was only the beginning. The road stretched out, dark and endless, as silence wrapped tightly around us both.